It won't be as windy as today across the north. We will see some rain clearing away initially from northern Scotland, but then pushing back into the Western Isles later. Elsewhere, again, bar a bit of drizzle over coast and hills, most places dry, but a cloudier day for the Midlands and East Anglia. And perhaps not quite as mild, but still temperatures double digits almost across the board. We might get up into the teens in one or two places. North East Scotland may well see some breaks in the cloud and some sunny spells. But in the west, signs of a change through Tuesday evening. A weather front, this line of rain is a weather front moving in. And it's a cold front as well. So it will be introducing colder air. Some showery rain on Wednesday, but still a lot of dry weather and just turning a little chillier. Goodbye.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB+ radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like.
Absolutely.
On Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Very good afternoon. It's 12 noon and you're with GB News Live with me, Mark Longhurst. Coming up for you this Monday lunchtime. Nicola Bulley's partner has spoken of his family's pain after a body was found near where she disappeared 3 weeks ago. Lancashire police say they sadly recovered a body from the water after being called to the River Wire, but with some criticism of the police operation from the Home Secretary this morning and questions over why it was dog walkers who found the body. We'll be speaking to a former Lancashire Police Chief Superintendent in a few minutes' time. President Biden makes a surprise visit to the Ukrainian capital, defying warnings of a Russian missile attack against the city. The US president on a walkabout in the centre of the city as air raid sirens were heard. He said a year after the Russian invasion, Kyiv stands, Ukraine stands, democracy stands. But what will the Kremlin's reaction now be? And deal or no deal, are we on the cusp of a Northern Ireland agreement, or has the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak been forced to take a step back because of threatened rebellions by his own side? Former Prime Minister Boris Johnson intervening over the weekend to say the deal he struck should not be abandoned. We'll be speaking to Jacob Rees-Mogg for his take. And then there were three. Angus Robertson rules himself out from standing as the next leader of the SNP, leaving either Kate Forbes, or Humza Yousaf as the front runners. But as the Independents' cause appears to take a hit, is it a job really anyone would want at the moment? And as ever, get in touch with us with your views, gbviews at gbnews.uk. We want to hear what you think. Before that, latest headlines, though, with Tamsin.
Mark, thank you, and good afternoon from the GB newsroom. It's 1 minute past 12. President Biden has made a surprise visit to Kyiv ahead of the first anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Meeting with President Zelensky, he said the United States would stand with Ukraine for as long as it takes. He's expected to announce the delivery of further military equipment, including ammunition and radar systems. Mr. Zelensky said the visit was an extremely important sign of support for all Ukrainians. It comes just days before the first anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion.
Putin thought Ukraine was weak and the West was divided. As you know, Mr. President, I said to you in the beginning, he's counting on us not sticking together. He was counting on the inability to keep NATO united. He was counting on us not to be able to bring in others on the side of Ukraine. He thought he could outlast us. I don't think he's thinking that right now. God knows what he's thinking, but I don't think he's thinking that.
The partner of missing mother of two, Nicola Bulley, has spoken of the family's agony after a body was found yesterday in the river near to where she went missing. Lancashire police are working to provide a formal identification of the body, which was found in the water around a mile from where Nicola was last seen. They're currently treating the death as unexplained. The 45-year-old disappeared more than 3 weeks ago whilst walking her dog. Peter Faulding, who led a private search of the river for Nicola, says he still doesn't believe she drowned.
If Nicola had fallen in the play at the bench where the phone was found, she would have landed in 2 feet of water. She would not have drowned at that location. I don't believe Nicola went in because the police divers searched that area thoroughly that afternoon and drowning victims go to the bottom. She could not have made it over the weir in a day. There's no way, and that my whole team and other police have looked at this. It baffled me.
More than 11,000 healthcare workers from the GMB and Unite unions in England and Wales are walking out today in their continuing dispute over pay and staffing. The workers striking include ambulance workers, paramedics and call handlers. GMB says it's over a month since the government engaged in meaningful dialogue. Elsewhere, the result of a ballot of around 45,000 junior doctors is expected to be announced later today by the British Medical Association. Number 10 has denied reports that the Prime Minister has been forced to delay an announcement over the Northern Ireland Protocol amid backlash from his own MPs. Talks between the government and the European Union are ongoing to try and break the impasse over the contentious post-Brexit trading deal. The DUP says it won't support an arrangement, which means the European Court of Justice maintains oversight. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says there's a real window of opportunity to move forward.
The UK and the EU have obviously edged closer together. The question now is whether the Prime Minister is strong enough to get it through his own backbenchers. And what I've said is, on Northern Ireland, the national interest comes first. So we will put party politics to one side. We will vote with the government if there's a deal to vote for. And so the Prime Minister doesn't have to rely on his backbenchers. We in the Labour Party are putting country first and party second.
Finance Secretary Kate Forbes has announced her bid to become the new leader of the SNP and First Minister of Scotland. It's after Nicola Sturgeon's unexpected resignation last week. Former SNP Westminster leader Angus Robertson has ruled himself out of the leadership race, saying it's not the right time for him and his family. Scotland's Health Secretary Humza Yousaf has already confirmed he will run, as will former Community Safety Minister Ash Regan. The new SNP leader will be announced on the 27th of March. North Korea has fired 2 more ballistic missiles from its east coast just 2 days after it launched an intercontinental ballistic missile into the sea off Japan's west coast. The sister of leader Kim Jong-un said her country's use of the Pacific Ocean as a firing range depended on the actions of the US military. South Korea has condemned the launches as a grave provocation, while Japan has called for an urgent UN Security Council meeting. German language movie All Quiet on the Western Front broke a BAFTA's record last night, winning 7 awards, the most ever by a foreign film. The World War I epic took home awards for the Best Film and Best Director. Elvis star Austin Butler won the Bafta for the Best Leading Actor, beating Colin Farrell, who'd been the favourite to take the prize for his role in The Banshees of Inisherin. This is GB News. More from me shortly. Now, though, it's back to Mark.
Tamsin, thank you very much indeed. So the partner of missing mum Nicola Bulley has described his family's agony after a body was found in the River Wyre in Lancashire, close to where she went missing. The body has not yet been identified. It was discovered yesterday by walkers and now has prompted fresh questions about the competence of the police operation and a private diving team who offered assistance. This morning, the Home Secretary said she was not wholly satisfied with the decision by police to release personal information about her. Well, officers and community support officers have been out this morning in the village St Michael's on Wyre. Let's get the latest now with our North West of England reporter, Sophie Reaper, who's been following the story, of course, from the beginning. Sophie, the worst possible circumstances for the family, it seems, waiting now for a formal identification, and yet now more questions being asked, new questions about how the search operation itself was mounted.
Absolutely. This has been a controversial case since day one. You mentioned there that there's even more questions being asked, and I'm sure they will continue to be asked now. Of course, yesterday, after major police presence here in St Michael's on Wyre, we received the news that a body had been recovered from the River Wyre in the search for missing mother of two, Nicola Bulley. Now, it hasn't been formally identified as Nicola yet. We're waiting to hear one way or another from Lancashire Police. The identification process is still ongoing, they say. Now, we know Nicola Bulley has been missing since Friday, the 27th of January. She dropped her two children off at school and then proceeded with her dog Willow to take a walk that she usually would down a bridge that's nearby here and towards the upper field where the last confirmed sighting of her took place. You mentioned there that her partner has talked of the agony that he and his family and, of course, Nicola's friends as well are facing whilst we wait to have the confirmation as to whether or not this body recovered is actually Nicola Bulley. The body was spotted by two walkers who were just walking down about a mile downstream from here, and they then informed the police of what they'd potentially found. But we're going to be bringing you updates on this case as it comes one way or another.
And tell us what's been happening there today, these reports of community officers out and about to help people. What's been the reaction in the village? Because, of course, we had the other police measures in place to effectively exclude all these sightseers and gawpers, as some of them were described as.
Well, there's been major police presence today. We've seen plenty of police vehicles, plenty of uniformed officers patrolling the streets. But other than that, there's been very few other people from the local community. I mean, this area usually is a hive of activity. There's dog walkers constantly walking around. But I think people are realistically just trying to get back to life as normal. I can hear the children at the local primary school enjoying a break. I can hear them in the playground. People, if they are walking around, are just going about their usual business. But realistically, the only thing that you could be able to tell is different here is, as you say, the big police presence.
And we've now got this political aspect, if you like, that the Prime Minister, the Home Secretary have got involved, questions being asked about Lancashire Police's operation. And yet it does all seem to narrow down to that stretch of water behind you and what's been happening in terms of tidal flow and the height of the water, all these technical aspects.
Well, there are so many unanswered questions still at this point. We are, of course, over the three-week mark now since Nicola originally went missing. And you mentioned, obviously, there's so many technical aspects. We had SGI here on that Monday. They came and helped with the search. And obviously, it's been controversial. Peter this morning has said that it was because she was in the reeds that they didn't manage to find her. But it's obviously a difficult situation for Lancashire Police. They've been doing, as they say, all they can in this investigation, but we're at this point now. There's still so many questions that I'm sure it will be ongoing now for many weeks and months to come until we get the answers that we so desperately need.
Yeah, and just to explain to people, we've just seen the pictures there of Peter Falding's team who worked extensively. But when the body was spotted, it was a police diving team that went in to actually recover it.
Yes, SGI were here a couple of weeks back for 3 days, and then they to Falding, saying that he believed she was not in the stretch of river where they had been searching. So it was police divers, Lancashire police divers, who actually followed up on that reports from those two walkers who said they'd spotted something, and it was then Lancashire police who got involved and sent the divers in to recover the body that was ultimately brought out.
Sophie, once again, thank you for updating us. Of course, back to you as any more details are released. But let's actually reflect, as we were discussing there with Sophie, that this morning the Home Secretary said she was not wholly satisfied with the police's decision to release personal information about Nicola Bulley. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer also giving his reaction, saying that a proper investigation may well explain the reasons for some of the force's decisions. Well, let's speak now with former Lancashire Police Chief Superintendent Bob Eastwood, who joins us. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Mr Eastwood, with obviously a lot of details still emerging, a lot of discussions still going on. But we do know there were these reports that details about Nicola were about perhaps to be released in the press after some monies were actually exchanged or money was sought for this information being made public.
Yeah, that's my belief too, and it's a shame that that message hasn't hit home in the way that it should have done. Really, this became public knowledge around Thursday of last week, and I'm very surprised that this, as an aspect of this particular story, is still going.
Do you think there was a failure, though, from Lancashire Police to explain why they were putting these details out into the public domain?
Well, I must admit, when I heard it, I cringed, but I didn't say anything. I used social media, and the reason why I didn't is because I didn't know why. I didn't know the facts, and I didn't want to guess because it suited any other agenda, really. And then when I read the press release that the family, Nicola's family, had released, it then became clear, and I was quietly confident that they must have had the grounds to do so, and it was basically to take away the exclusive that a media outlet was after running with.
Yeah, and that the family may well have been involved in that decision-making process.
I've no knowledge of that, I'm afraid.
But clearly now that we've got the Prime Minister, the Home Secretary, the Leader of the Opposition all involved with this extra agenda, if you like, coming on board, I guess it makes it more difficult for the police service itself to try and put all the pieces together.
Yeah, I think that's a conversation for the Lancashire Police and Crime Commissioner to take up with the Prime Minister's office and the Home Secretary's office, because they need to understand, and they obviously don't, which is why they are still commenting. They need to understand the rationale. Yeah. Because this isn't, these comments are not helping two things. One is the investigation as it continues, but it's also not helping Nicola's family as much as they are probably trying to do. They and anybody else needs to have an appreciation as to what's been going on here.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about the comments that you've made elsewhere about the so-called specialists imposing themselves on the investigation, which actually fed into a lot of people's obsession. And clearly, this was part of the reason why these details had to be made public, because so much was being discussed on social media. Did the police get it wrong by bringing in outside elements into the search and investigation?
Well, hindsight's a wonderful thing, isn't it? I was surprised when they did do that. I think with hindsight, I doubt very much whether any other police force would do that. And they had the resources themselves. I don't know how some of these so-called specialists ingratiated themselves within the investigation. I've no idea. I do believe that was not upon invitation by Lancashire Police. And I've also heard that some people... Sorry, go on.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, because clearly people are not really au fait with the decision-making process, but it's your understanding that that team was not brought in with the well, should we say, the agreement of Lancashire Police?
I believe not. I mean, I've also heard, but I don't know whether this is the case, that, you know, people have been knocking on the door of the family, offering help and interviewing them and speaking to the neighbours and one thing and another. And, you know, whilst I wouldn't want to control the rights of the media, you know, the rights of anybody to ask questions, but it's best left to the professionals. And I include the media outlets for that. You know, people that have got a financial gain by getting involved, because that is their business to get involved, their company. I do draw the line to that, because I think the motives are clearly financial and for themselves, and I don't think it's very helpful at all.
But drawing on your experience, there has been a question about the change in the relationship between the media and the police and journalists, where, as you know, in the old days, the police kept the media pretty closely informed on a need-to-know basis, and the fact that, you know, don't make these details public until we're sure. Has that changed, and has that led to this difficult situation this time round? Post-Leveson, if you like.
Yeah, I don't think Leveson plays a part in this. You know, I really don't. There's obviously something gone wrong somewhere with the trust in the partnership. I've always been quite clear that the role of the press is twofold. One, to hold the police to account, and so they should. And secondly, in order to assist the police in fighting crime. The media is a very powerful partner in that partnership. Something's gone wrong, and both sides somehow need to get together and start thrashing out what the problems have been. But I understand that, you know, Lancashire Constabulary have been overwhelmed in a variety of different places, and it's hardly surprising that they've been pushed into a very defensive position. You know, they've searched some of the houses at least 3 times, and that's because they've been, in a way, pestered to demonstrate that they have dotted every I and crossed every T when they already had. You know, and these things haven't helped. And I think the pressure that they've been under has been overwhelming. And I maybe think there's something to learn going forward. Well, and this is across the country in how investigation teams manage that critically important relationship with the press.
And final thought, Bob, on how that is handled in the future, because clearly, you know, this is a valuable resource for the police to have the public's eyes and ears in these circumstances, because something that someone spots can actually lead then to other investigations. Do you think that, you know, that will now be, for all police forces, something they're going to have to look at very carefully?
Well, I think so. But let me just say that there's some very unscrupulous people out there. You know, there's some comments made by some press members which I would describe as misogynistic abuse of the female detective superintendent. Absolutely appalling things to say. Unnecessary, no relevance to the investigation, and that caused a lot of damage and a lot of hurt and upset. Yeah. So, you know, there's got to be some behavioural issues, some sort of grounds of engagement. But finally, you know, some of these unscrupulous people extend to members of the public that purport to be a member of the press because they're running a TikTok service. You know, there's got to be some sensible conversations on who amounts to the press. I was told earlier by Radio Lancashire that some people who were clearly TikTokers, they were stood with the press and they're climbing over the fence to film the body, and then the police had to intervene. So just think of all that in context, the demands that all this has placed on Lancashire Police, because notwithstanding they've had this to do, they've also had to police the rest of Lancashire. And a man, sadly, was found in the Leeds-Liverpool Canal last week that generated, relatively speaking, insignificant media attention.
Yeah, and of course the spotlight's still on Lancashire Police as we speak. Bob Eastwood, former Chief Superintendent with Lancashire, thank you very much indeed for your time here on GB News. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
More reaction, of course, more news as we get it on that story. But let's move to international affairs now, and let's bring you the shot live from Ukrainian capital Kyiv, because many people there are talking about the extraordinary pictures and the news that spread like wildfire as the President of the United States, Joe Biden, went on walkabout in the city. The visit to mark the anniversary, of course, of the invasion by Russia. Joe Biden arriving in Kyiv earlier, having been on a train from Poland. And there the stars and stripes behind both President Zelensky and President Biden at the Mariinsky Palace, announcing an additional $500 million in US assistance in terms of ammunition, howitzers and so on, to reassure Ukraine of continuing American and Allied support as the conflict continues. And, of course, very much a message there to President Putin and the Kremlin. We'll have more reaction on that coming up. Also coming up, the showdown between Kate Forbes and Humza Yousaf for the leadership of the SNP, but not many others seem to want the job. So who's got the better chance of the top job and what can they do with it? Taking a look at that in a moment, but let's take a break for you.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to GB News Live. Now, Rishi Sunak's seen his plans for a deal on the Northern Ireland Protocol suffer a setback following a backlash from both senior Tory backbenchers and, of course, Ulster Unionists. The pressure growing on the Prime Minister as government sources said that tense talks in Downing Street over the weekend on overhauling the Northern Ireland Protocol were yet to yield a breakthrough. The Democratic Unionist Party leader Sir Geoffrey Donaldson saying the big moment had arrived. The next decision by London and Brussels having profound consequences. Well, let's get more from Stormont and our Northern Ireland reporter, Doogie Beattie, who's joining us now. And Doogie, suggestions that it might be some kind of video conference call this afternoon with Chris Heaton-Harris and also James Cleverly and the EU Commission as well. Things are moving.
Well, they are moving, but it is a very large game of political chess, if you like. If Rishi Sunak decides to take the cover of Keir Starmer and try to push a deal through that the DUP don't get on board with, well, then he spent political capital inside his own party and caused a rift in there and still would have no deal. If Geoffrey Donaldson decides to go back into Stormont behind us and has give way to many of his red lines, he too will face electoral problems. And if the EU decides to give too much, they will also face a backlash inside the EU itself for maybe making Northern Ireland a better place to do business to go into both the EU and the UK. I am told that work is still ongoing at this moment. Inside the DUP, those talks are still continuing. It doesn't look likely at this moment in time that there will be a deal here. Those red lines have to be met by unionists or they could face real problems. We'll see how it goes over the next few hours. And as you say, I have also heard the word that there is some sort of conferencing going on to see, is this worth continuing on with, or is it just a bridge too far for the Conservative Party before another general election?
Michael Martin, south of the border, basically warning against playing politics with the future of Northern Ireland. But we have got this Times report at the weekend suggesting that Rishi Sunak was willing to go ahead with the accord, even without DUP support. What's been the reaction of the DUP to that?
Well, it'll be as it always has been. The DUP represent the majority of unionists in Northern Ireland, and they will not go back into government behind it. I mean, everybody has actually boxed themselves into a corner now where they cannot move. And Micheál Martin's comments probably don't help it any either, because you got to remember that Micheál Martin is part of the EU, and in that point, he will be trying to negotiate so as the Republic of Ireland aren't at a disadvantage to Northern Ireland, especially when it comes around manufacturing and farming, things that will really play very, very badly inside the EU. So is there much to play for at this minute in time? I think somebody has to give ground, and I don't believe it will be the DUP.
OK, as ever, Dougie, thank you for that at Stormont. We'll see what the video conference call comes out with this afternoon. For the moment, thank you very much indeed. Let's turn in from Northern Ireland to Scotland now, and the future of the Scottish Nationalist Party. So far, Scotland's Health Secretary Humza Yousaf announcing he will run for the post to replace Nicola Sturgeon, as well as the former Community Safety Minister Ash Regan, who resigned from her ministerial position in protest at the gender reform plans outlined. But now Scotland's Finance Secretary, Kate Forbes, who's on maternity leave, has announced she too will stand in the leadership contest. But the party's former leader in Westminster, Angus Robertson, ruling himself out of the race. Joining us in the studio, our political reporter Olivia Utley, who's been following the story up in Edinburgh, stood outside Holyrood in those freezing days. Interesting that so far only 3 want the job. Could it be they're looking at what actually the task in hand is and thinking, gosh, it's going to be a bit uphill?
It does feel as though it's going to be quite an uphill battle for the SNP to regain their momentum from here. And it looks as though the contest could get pretty bloody. The front runners at the moment are Humza Yousaf, the Health Secretary, and Kate Forbes, the Financial Secretary, who has been under fire from those on the sort of progressive left of the party, which is quite a big chunk of the party, for her conservative Christian views on topics like buffer zones around abortion clinics and of course, the Gender Recognition Act, which she disagrees with.
And who some say maybe was the issue that was Nicola Sturgeon's downfall, although others in the SNP would argue that case.
Absolutely. And the issue with Kate Forbes was that she was on maternity leave, and it's thought that that is why Nicola Sturgeon rushed the bill through at such a pace before Christmas, because she was worried that once Kate Forbes got back from maternity leave, it would be more difficult to get that bill through. So the continuity candidate, it seems, the sort of Sturgeon allies seem to be coalescing at this early stage around Humza Yousaf. But he has been under immense pressure over recent months for his handling of the NHS in Scotland, which is in a much worse place than the NHS in England. So he's by no means particularly popular. On the other hand, Kate Forbes, as well as having those issues surrounding her personal opinions on these social issues, there is the issue of whether she would want to and whether she could retain the support of the Greens, who are obviously in coalition with the SNP. And the thinking at the moment is that Kate Forbes has been very open in her criticism of the Scottish Greens. She said openly that she doesn't think that they're doing green things anymore. They're pursuing these social progressive issues at the expense of their green policies. And the Greens have suggested that they wouldn't stay in coalition with her, which would mean that the SNP would lose their majority.
Right, interesting point. And this existential question for them, what are they going to do? What are they going to represent? Because as you've indicated, people are saying, look, never mind, nationalism and independence. We've got a health service, in their view, that is failing. We've got problems with the ferries. We've got problems with poverty. We've got problems with drugs and so on. And they want these social issues addressed. So therefore, will the political drive, if you like, move away from the whole issue of independence?
Well, this is a very interesting point, because the other The huge issue is whether or not the SNP treats the next election and subsequent elections as de facto referendums. That is the strategy that Nicola Sturgeon wanted to pursue, but there were many, and even in her inner circle within the SNP, who felt that that was a bad idea because, as you say, there are all these pressing problems pertaining to Scotland and the state of the Scottish state, which many voters feel are more important than independence. So what will all of these candidates do about the issue of independence? There isn't a clear legal route for them to pursue to reach independence. The Supreme Court has vetoed the idea of another referendum imminently. So it's a question of whether they turn it into a de facto referendum. Ash Regan, who is pretty low down the list, not really a front runner, has said that she would turn not only the next election, but every subsequent election into a de facto referendum until Scottish independence was achieved. It'll be really interesting to see what the others do, or whether they choose to prioritise those social issues.
Right, and fair to say that Kate Forbes is the bookies' favourite, or is it a sort of each-way bet on them at the moment?
It felt a day or two ago as though Kate Forbes was the favourite. Now that these big names, the Sturgeon allies, are beginning to sort of coalesce around Yumza Husaf, it feels as though he could emerge as the front runner, but I would say neck and neck at the moment.
OK, we shall watch and see if there are any other personalities coming out fairly shortly to declare. But for the moment, Olivia, thank you very much indeed. So 3 in that race at the moment. Coming up, the latest on, yes, more ambulance strikes going on. We'll be live on the picket lines. Also, the latest on the Bafta Awards and that epic All Quiet on the Western Front emerging as the huge winner. But let's get an update now on the news headlines with Tamsin.
Mark, thank you. Good afternoon from the GB newsroom. It's 12:33. Here are the headlines. President Biden has made a surprise visit to Kyiv ahead of the first anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Meeting with President Zelensky, he said the United States would stand with Ukraine for as long as it takes. He's expected to announce the delivery of further military equipment, including ammunition and radar systems. Mr. Zelensky said the visit was an extremely important sign of support for all Ukrainians. It comes just days before the first anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion.
Putin thought Ukraine was weak and the West was divided. As you know, Mr. President, I said to you in the beginning, he's counting on us not sticking together. He was counting on the inability to keep NATO united. He was counting on us not to be able to bring in others on the side of Ukraine. He thought he could outlast us. I don't think he's thinking that right now. God knows what.
The partner of missing mother of 2, Nicola Bulley, has spoken of the family's agony after a body was found yesterday in the river near to where she went missing. Lancashire police are working to provide a formal identification of the body, which was found in the water around a mile from where Nicola was last seen. They're currently treating the death as unexplained. The 45-year-old disappeared more than 3 weeks ago whilst walking her dog. More than 11,000 healthcare workers from the GMB and Unite unions in England and Wales are walking out today in their continuing dispute over pay and staffing. The workers striking include ambulance workers, paramedics and call handlers. GMB says it's over a month since the government engaged in meaningful dialogue. Elsewhere, the result of a ballot of around 45,000 junior doctors is expected to be announced later today by the British Medical Association. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB+ radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. B, I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8". My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions. I have no time for cultural totalitarianism. We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like.
Absolutely.
On Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
And welcome back to GB News Live. Let's give you an update from number 10, particularly if you are a Roald Dahl fan, because the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, has condemned, we're being told by the Prime Minister's official spokesman, the rewriting of Roald Dahl books. The press officer saying, when it comes to our rich and varied literary heritage, the Prime Minister agrees with the BFG, big friendly giant, that we shouldn't gobble funk around with words, close quote. The official adding, I think it's important that works of literature and works of fiction are preserved and not airbrushed. We have always defended the right to free speech and expression. So therefore, no more gobble funking with words, according to number 10. More reaction, of course, to that as it comes through. But let's update you now on an alleged victim who's to give evidence in an organ harvesting trial. Ikem Beatrice Ekwamadu and their daughter Sonia and Obina Obeta are all charged in relation to an alleged plot to bring a young man from Nigeria for his kidney to be harvested in the UK. The young man who was allegedly trafficked due to give evidence today and tomorrow. Let's get more now with our national reporter, Paul Hawkins, who's outside the court. Extraordinary story, Paul. What has the court heard so far today?
Yeah, we've been hearing from the alleged victim this morning via video. And just to give you the background to this case, this is Ike Ekweremadu, a senior Nigerian senator, 60 years old. Both he, his wife Beatrice, their daughter Sonia, and a doctor, Obina Obeta, all charged with conspiring to arrange or facilitate the travel of a young man to Britain with a view to his exploitation between August 2021 and May 2022. Now, the prosecution alleged that exploitation involved bringing this man, a street trader from Lagos in Nigeria, to the UK, pretending he was a cousin of their daughter Sonia, who was a kidney patient at the Royal Free Hospital, and then giving him up to £7,000 for a kidney and promising him work within the UK. That is the allegation from the prosecution. And we should add, by the way, that the operation never went ahead because the consultant felt that the donor wasn't a good match, and he was unsure whether the donor really understood what was happening. So the operation never went ahead, and then this was uncovered on the 5th of May last year when the alleged victim presented himself to a police station in southwest London saying that he had been trafficked from Nigeria and was being forced to donate a kidney, and that he'd been walking for 3 days. The Ekweremadus were then subsequently arrested at Heathrow Airport, returning from Turkey in June. They were then subsequently charged, and today, as you say, we heard from the alleged victim. We heard about his background, that he grew up in a village in Nigeria, that he stopped schooling at 15, that he didn't have, his family didn't have any money, and so he went to work for his uncle in a phone shop, selling phone accessories in Lagos. And then he was contacted by this Dr. Obina Obeta, he says, through WhatsApp, who promised him a life in the UK where he would help him find work while he was living in his house, in Dr. Obina Obeta's house. He says that he had to undergo blood tests, which he thought were part of the visa process. He didn't have to fill out any forms, saying that they filled out forms at him. He claimed that they being the doctor, and that he had never left Nigeria before and never even applied for a visa. So he continues to give evidence behind me at the Old Bailey, and the case continues.
Paul, thank you very much indeed for that. Back to you, of course, as the court hears more. But let's bring you a bit of breaking news on the business front. The supermarket chain Aldi saying it's to create 2,400 new jobs as part of plans to almost double, it says, its numbers of stores within the M25, the Greater London area, saying at the moment it's got about 60 stores and shops in that area, but a multi-million-pound expansion programme to go ahead. The group, of course, becoming the UK's fourth largest supermarket in recent weeks, overtaking Morrison's. And the announcement following another one that 6,000 jobs will be across the UK in its growth ambitions, it says. Of course, this coming, whereas many stores say they're struggling at the moment. We'll have another report on that coming up fairly shortly. But let's update you now on the latest strike action. Thousands of ambulance workers staging a fresh walkout today in their long-running dispute over pay and conditions, staffing in particular. The GMB saying more than 11,000 ambulance workers out across England and Wales, including paramedics, emergency care assistants and call handlers. Now, also workers in the Unite Union in parts of the country on strike. Let's get more from Crawley down in Sussex with our GB News national reporter, Ellie, on the picket line there. It's growing increasingly, protracted and bitter, some would say, Ellie.
Certainly is, Mark. Good afternoon to you. Yes, we're outside the south-east coast ambulance headquarters here. This is where half of all ambulance calls come in the southeast of the country. And you can see on the picket line here that we have some of the call handlers and the dispatchers here. I'm going to share some of their signs. Understaffed, undervalued, underpaid on this one. Value your NHS. And down on the floor down here, another sign. Patients aren't dying because we're striking. We are striking because they are dying. Just some of the signs on this picket line. It is quite a small picket line right now. That's because they are taking it in turns to come out from the calls that they are taking inside. We're going to expect about 25% of staff here at this headquarters to walk out today. The rest are staying to answer those emergency calls. So at this point, I want to bring in Lib, who joins me now. Lib Whitfield is the regional organiser of GMB here in the southeast. Lib, why are we here on the picket line? What are you striking for?
This is the fourth day of strike action by GMB workers in the ambulance service because last year they were awarded a 4% pay rise, supposedly. Inflation is above 10%. It's another pay cut. They've had pay cut after pay cut after pay cut, on average about 20% over the last 12 years. They have had enough, and the reason it's such a massive problem is because they can't get the staff to work in the ambulance service because the pay is so low.
And the biggest criticism of all NHS strikes right now, not just ambulance workers, is that this is selfish, that they are putting people's lives at risk. What do you say to that criticism?
I mean, a lot of that criticism comes from the government deliberately because they want to shame these workers so that they can underpay these workers, and that's what it is. They are actually striking. Yes, it is a selfish issue for pay, technically, but actually they are seeing more and more colleagues leave the ambulance service. They cannot get enough staff to work on ambulances to provide the patient care. We have 130,000 vacancies in the NHS because of the lack of pay. It's not an issue that we should be ashamed of, that our members of staff in this service deserve a decent pay rise.
Do you see a resolution coming down the line anytime soon? The Health Secretary says that now is not the time to ask for pay rises with inflation as high as it is.
The government said in 2010 it wasn't the time to ask for pay rises. They said in 2012, 2013, every single year for the last 12 years, they've said to the NHS, now is not the time for decent pay. When is going to be the time? My members, in half of all the trusts across the country, there are food banks for NHS workers. They have to be paid at a decent rate so we can actually provide staff. And you saw the sign here. Patients aren't dying because they're striking. They are striking because every single day, members of the public are coming to harm in ambulance queues, in ambulance waits, because there are not enough staff.
OK, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much for your time. Well, just a word from the government there. There's Steve Barclay, the Health Secretary. He has pointed to warnings from the Bank of England about the rate of inflation. He says talks have been constructive so far, but he urges the unions to call off their strike. Well, that is not the case so far. As you can see behind me, the GMB union saying that 11,000 ambulance workers will be out on strike today, and there will also be some from the Unite union as well. But Mark, in the next few weeks, we are going to see an uptake in NHS strikes. We are going to hear from the junior doctors a little bit later on the results of their ballot. They could be out on strike next. That will be confirmed later on this afternoon, but it does look like the next few weeks and months could be a lot of upheaval in the NHS, and it doesn't look like the resolution is coming anytime soon.
Indeed, but the horn's still being sounded, as we can hear. Ellie, thanks for updating us there down in Crawley in West Sussex. But let's speak now to the Chief Executive once more, the Welsh Ambulance Service, Jason Killins, who's been updating us, of course, on what's been happening there in Wales. Jason, thanks for your time once more. I think we've got the stoppage going into tomorrow and then maybe even Wednesday in Wales. But the last time we spoke to you, there were some positive signs. Maybe there's going to be some kind of breakthrough, and some of the industrial action had been shelved for the moment.
Good afternoon to you. As you can see behind me, I'm visiting staff up in North Wales at Colwyn Bay today, and they've been telling me how frustrated they are about their inability to do the job. And you're right, we've got members from the Unite union taking 72 hours worth of action today, tomorrow and into Wednesday. And then in addition, we've got members of our staff from GMB union taking action today. Now, what that's meant is we've seen overnight and through the day today about 50% of our workforce unavailable to us because they're taking strike action. And whilst with the exemptions we've got from that action, we're continuing to respond to immediately life-threatened patients, those which are unconscious, those who are continuously fitting in cardiac arrest and so on. Other patients are waiting longer. And to your point about the pay offer, Welsh Government did come forward with a revised pay offer a week or so ago. Sadly, that's been rejected by all of the trade unions. And so, of course, I continue to encourage government and the unions to remain in dialogue, to think to find a compromise and bring the dispute to a swift resolution.
Right. OK, I don't want you to comment on the negotiations because, of course, that's not part of your remit. But, you were fairly optimistic last time we spoke. So, I mean, is that optimism still there in the background, or have things broken down in that sense?
Well, I certainly think there is room for optimism. And talking to staff this morning, they're clear with me about some of the additional things that they think could bring a resolution to the dispute. As you say, it's not with us as the employer, it's a matter for government. And I would continue to encourage government and the unions to talk about these issues and seek to find a compromise to bring the dispute to a resolution.
And again, just to reassure the public, what should they do in circumstances where they have an emergency, or they see an RTA road traffic accident, or they believe someone may be having a stroke or a heart attack? What should they be doing in these next few days?
Well, look, of course, we're under significant pressure at the moment, and today is probably going to be the most pressured for us here in Wales, with 2 unions taking strike action this week. The public should, if they're in any doubt, continue to call us. We will assess those 999 calls, and we are continuing to respond to those seriously ill and injured patients, those immediately life-threatened ones. But other less serious patients will receive advice over the phone, or they may be asked to make their own way to the emergency department. But those less serious patients will wait longer for a response.
Jason, thank you for updating us once more. Jason Killins, Chief Executive of the Welsh Ambulance Service, updating us there in North Wales, Colwyn Bay. Thank you very much indeed. And, of course, we'll keep you updated with, if there are, indeed, any developments on the industrial front. But let's return now to that case of Nicola Bulley, with the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, speaking about her concerns at the personal information that was released. Here's what she had to say a little earlier.
Well, first of all, I want to put on record my deepest thoughts and sympathies for the family of Nicola Bulley. It must be a horrendous experience that they are going through right now. We need to let the police carry out and conclude their investigation. I did have concerns earlier in the week about some of the elements relating to the release of personal information of Nicola Bulley into the public domain. I raised those concerns with the Chief Constable. I wasn't wholly satisfied, I have to say, with some of the responses I got, but it is a matter for the police themselves. There are some investigations ongoing looking into how the investigation's been handled, and we must let that carry out its own process. But we must just let the investigation conclude, and then we will see what the investigations and the inquiries come back with.
Home Secretary speaking a little early, just to remind you that Lancashire Police not yet formally identified the body that was recovered. The death itself being treated as unexplained. And this morning, both police officers and community support officers on patrol in the village of St Michael on Wyre, but no police presence at the river where the body was discovered. That's the latest at the scene that we're getting from our correspondent there, Sophie Reaper. Now, as we've been reporting, Joe Biden, the US president, made a surprise trip to Kyiv today. He made the appearance alongside Ukraine's leader, President Zelensky, saying that Vladimir Putin did not expect such a united response against him.
The cost that Ukraine has had to bear has been extraordinarily high. And the sacrifices have been far too great. They've been met, but they've been far too great. We mourn alongside the families of those who've been lost to the brutal and unjust war. We know that there'll be very difficult days and weeks and years ahead. But Russia's aim was to wipe Ukraine off the map. Putin's war of conquest is failing. Russia's military has lost half its territory it once occupied. Young, talented Russians are fleeing by the tens of thousands, not wanting to come back to Russia. Not just fleeing from the military, fleeing from Russia itself, because they see no future in their country. Russia's economy is now a backwater, isolated and struggling. Putin thought Ukraine was weak and the West was divided. As you know, Mr. President, I said to you in the beginning, he's counting on us not sticking together. He was counting on the inability to keep NATO united. He was counting on us not to be able to bring in others on the side of Ukraine. He thought he could outlast us. I don't think he's thinking that right now.
Well, as well as those words from the US president, we also had details of another $500 million in military assistance, Javelin missiles, howitzers, artillery and more ammunition as well as he visited President Zelensky at the Mariinsky Palace. We'll have more reaction to that coming up. But let's take a quick look at what you've been telling us of your view on today's news. Don't forget, you can let us know what you're thinking. gbviews@gbnews.uk. First, of course, on the latest with the case of Nicola Bulley, John says this fiasco has just shown the British people how utterly useless our police are. Although, of course, we would reflect, perhaps, John, that we've had a former chief superintendent indicating the difficulties the police have had in the investigation. Deborah, meanwhile, it's good to see one former police officer giving a calm, reasoned perspective to this tragic case. Lancashire police have had to deal with constant onslaught of second-guessing from the media, public and so-called experts, which have blurred the lines. Let the police do their job. As regards the SNP and Scotland, we've got David saying, becoming SNP leader is a poisoned chalice, while Ian says Sunak is going to send aircraft to Ukraine. These are expensive items which no doubt he will have to borrow money to replace, while our defences are depleted. As a taxpayer, I see this as a terrible waste of money. Keep your views coming, and we'll be coming to the top of the hour with more on the search for Nicola Bulley and indeed the police reaction. Stay with us.
Hello, I'm Alex Deakin, and this is your latest weather update from the Met Office. Gusty winds across much of the north today. They'll be steadily easing through the day. Bit of rain across Scotland, but most places dry and, for most of us, pretty mild. We've got low to the north, a high to the south, and in between this weather front, that's where we're seeing the thickest cloud and a little bit of rain. But the isobars fairly tightly packed as well. It is quite gusty, particularly over northeast England and northern Scotland. Staying fairly damp through the central belts, bit of drizzle over the Cumbrian Fells and over Snowdonia, but most places dry, and actually some decent spells of sunshine over parts of the Midlands, East Anglia and the southeast. And it is mild, so temperatures into the teens, 14, 15 Celsius where we see some sunshine. Cooler further north, but even here temperatures are a touch above average for the time of year, but feeling a bit colder with the winds. Those winds will continue to ease through this evening. The rain should clear away from the central belt, but fairly damp nights across parts of western Scotland. Otherwise, again, most places dry. Could be some mist and fog. We'll generally just keep a lot of cloud. And look at these temperatures overnight, staying at 7 or 8 Celsius, so a very mild start to Tuesday. Tuesday, again, mild, dry and cloudy for the majority. It won't be as windy as today across the north. We will see some rain clearing away initially from northern Scotland, but then pushing back into the Western Isles later. Elsewhere, again, bar a bit of drizzle over coast and hills, most places dry, but a cloudier day for the Midlands and East Anglia. And perhaps not quite as mild, but still temperatures double digits almost across the board. We might get up into the teens in 1 or 2 places. North East Scotland may well see some breaks in the cloud and some sunny spells. But in the west, signs of a change through Tuesday evening. A weather front, this line of rain is a weather front moving in. And it's a cold front as well. So it will be introducing colder air. Some showery rain on Wednesday, but still a lot of dry weather and just turning a little chillier. Goodbye.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's just gone 1 o'clock. You're watching GB News Live with me, Mark Longhurst, and coming up for you this lunchtime. The Home Secretary says she is not wholly satisfied with the conduct of Lancashire Police. Pressure mounting on the force over why it fell to local walkers to discover a body yesterday in the search for missing Nicola Bulley. Her partner has spoken of his agony at the discovery, which has not yet been identified formally. We'll have the latest from the scene and get the take of a former police and crime commissioner and the detective in the Sarah Payne case. President Biden making a surprise visit to the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv, defying warnings of a Russian missile attack against the city. The US president on walkabout in the centre as air raid sirens were heard. He said that a year after the Russian invasion, Kyiv stands, Ukraine stands, democracy stands. As more support is announced, we'll have the latest from Darren McCaffrey on this historic visit. Deal or no deal? Are we on the cusp of a Northern Ireland agreement, or has the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak been forced to step back because of the threatened rebellion by his own side? We'll be live in Northern Ireland with local journalists to see what the DUP will be thinking on the issue. And in Scotland, 32-year-old Finance Secretary Kate Forbes, now the front-runner maybe to become First Minister. The SNP heavyweight Angus Robertson has ruled himself out. We'll have all the latest on the runners and riders. And as ever, get in touch with your views, gbviews@gbnews.uk. We want to hear what you're thinking about the stories of the day. But before that, an update on all the headlines with Tamsin.
Mark, thank you very much, and good afternoon from the GB newsroom. It's 1 minute past one. President Biden has promised more than $500 million worth of aid to Ukraine after making a surprise trip to its capital. It comes just days before the first anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion. Mr. Zelensky said the visit was an extremely important sign of support for all Ukrainians. The US president said his country would stand with Ukraine for as long as it takes.
Putin thought Ukraine was weak and the West was divided. As you know, Mr. President, I said to you in the beginning, he's counting on us not sticking together. He was counting on the inability to keep NATO united. He was counting on us not to be able to bring in others on the side of Ukraine. He thought he could outlast us. I don't think he's thinking that right now. God knows what he's thinking, but I don't think he's thinking that.
The partner of missing mother of two, Nicola Bulley, has spoken of the family's agony after a body was found yesterday in the river near to where she went missing. Lancashire police are working to provide a formal identification of the body, which was found in the water around a mile from where Nicola was last seen. They're currently treating the death as unexplained. The 45-year-old disappeared more than 3 weeks ago whilst walking her dog. Peter Folding, who led a private search of the river for Nicola, says he still doesn't believe she drowned.
If Nicola had fallen in the play at the bench where the phone was found, she would have landed in 2 feet of water. She would not have drowned at that location. I don't believe Nicola went in because the police divers searched that area thoroughly that afternoon and drowning victims go to the bottom. She could not have made it over the weir in a day. There's no way, and that my whole team and other police have looked at this. It baffled me.
More than 11,000 healthcare workers from the GMB and Unite unions in England and Wales are walking out today in their continuing dispute over pay and staffing. The workers striking include ambulance workers, paramedics and call handlers. GMB says it's over a month since the government engaged in meaningful dialogue. Elsewhere, the result of a ballot of around 45,000 junior doctors is expected to be announced later today by the British Medical Association. The Foreign Secretary and Northern Ireland Secretaries are to speak with the European Commission Vice President later as negotiations continue over the Northern Ireland Protocol. Number 10 has denied reports the Prime Minister has been forced to delay announcing a breakthrough amid backlash from his own MPs. The DUP and backbench Tories say it won't support a deal which retains oversight from the European Court of Justice. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says there's a real window of opportunity to move forward.
The UK and the EU have obviously edged closer together. The question now is whether the Prime Minister is strong enough to get it through his own backbenchers. And what I've said is, on Northern Ireland, the national interest comes first. So we will put party politics to one side. We will vote with the government if there's a deal to vote for. And so the Prime Minister doesn't have to rely on his backbenchers. We in the Labour Party are putting country first and party second.
The most dangerous domestic abusers will be added to the sex offender register as the Home Office vows to treat violence against women as a national threat. The government plans to invest up to £8.4 million over the next 2 years to fund specialist support programmes for victims. Domestic abuse affected around 2.4 million people in England and Wales in the past year. Home Secretary Suella Braverman says the changes are needed.
I'm changing the law to ensure that there's more robust monitoring of perpetrators. We're introducing measures to ensure that we will be able to tag offenders of domestic abuse, and we will be also adding offenders of domestic abuse onto the Violent and Sex Offenders Register. And also, all police chiefs and forces around the country will now be put on a footing to deal with violence against women and girls as a national threat.
Finance Secretary Kate Forbes has announced her bid to become the new leader of the SNP and First Minister of Scotland. It's after Nicola Sturgeon's unexpected resignation last week. Former SNP Westminster leader Angus Robertson has ruled himself out of the leadership race, saying it's not the right time for him and his family. Scotland's Health Secretary Humza Yousaf has already confirmed he'll run, as will former Community Safety Minister Ash Regan. The new SNP leader will be announced on the 27th of March. This is GB News. More from me shortly. Now, though, it's back to Mark.
Tamsin, thanks very much indeed. So, the partner of missing mum Nicola Bulley describing his agony after that body was found in the River Wyre in Lancashire, close to where she'd gone missing. The body has not yet been formally identified. It was discovered yesterday by walkers and has, of course, prompted fresh questions about the organisation of the police search and the private diving team who'd offered assistance. Well, this morning, the Home Secretary is saying she was not wholly satisfied with the decision by the police to release the personal information about Nicola. This is what she had to say a little earlier.
Well, first of all, I want to put on record my deepest thoughts and sympathies for the family of Nicola Bulley. It must be a horrendous experience that they are going through right now. We need to let the police carry out and conclude their investigation. I did have concerns earlier in the week about some of the elements relating to the release of personal information of Nicola Bulley into the public domain. I raised those concerns with the Chief Constable. I wasn't wholly satisfied, I have to say, with some of the responses I got, but it is a matter for the police themselves. There are some investigations ongoing looking into how the investigation has been handled, and we must let that carry out its own process. But we must just let the investigation conclude, and then we will see what the investigations and the inquiries come back with.
Home Secretary speaking a little earlier. Well, let's get the very latest now with Sophie Reaper, our correspondent who's been following this story from the beginning and there by the river. Sophie, just to remind us what's going on there today. Clearly the search itself has finished, but we gather that police and community officers have been in the village this morning.
They have indeed. There's been massive police presence in the village of St Michael's on Wyre this morning and into the afternoon. We've seen uniformed officers and patrol vehicles all there offering support to anyone who may need it. There's also, of course, as you would expect, been lots of media, everyone here reporting on the latest in this investigation, that yesterday a body was found as part of the search for missing mother of two, Nicola Bulley. We still don't know. That body hasn't been formally identified yet, so we don't know either way yet whether that body is that of Nicola Bulley. We're waiting to hear from Lancashire Police on that one. Now, where I'm stood today is, you can see behind me the church of St Michael's, the River Wyre flowing towards the sea in that direction. We know that that morning of Friday, the 27th of January, 25 days ago, by the way, we're on now, 25 days since Nicola originally went missing. We know that that morning she dropped her two children off at the local primary school, which is just out of vision to my left. She then walked with her dog Willow along the path, across the bridge and towards the upper field where she was last known to have been seen. We also know that her phone was located on the bench that has been such a prevalent image in the media over the past few weeks. So her family have said that they've obviously been informed about the latest developments. They've said they're heartbroken and they're now waiting to hear, just as the rest of the nation are, who've been gripped by this very, very mysterious case.
Yeah, I mean, your heart goes out to the family and friends, of course. I mean, we've got the politicians weighing in now with all sorts of questions. still no formal identification, and yet these new questions now about how the search and the investigation was carried out.
Well, the search itself has been very in-depth. Of course, we know from right near the beginning of this, Lancashire Police told us that their main working hypothesis was that Nicola had sadly gone into the water. That prompted major searches of the River Wyre. There was divers, there was helicopters, and then, of course, as we all know, SGI, the independent search team led by Peter Faulding, became involved. However, after 3 days, they pulled out, with Peter Faulding saying that he believed she was not in that stretch of river, and that in itself is now quite controversial because, as we all know, a body, we don't know yet whether it is Nicola, but a body has been found, and although Peter says it was in the reeds, not in the body of water, that in itself is going to raise plenty of questions for people who've been intrigued by this case.
Indeed. As ever, Sophie, thank you for updating us with the latest. Back to you, of course, as we get more. But we were reflecting there on the politicians. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer giving his reaction to what's been happening there, saying a proper investigation may well explain the reasons for some of the Lancashire Force's decisions. This is what he had to say.
Well, first and foremost, I think all of us will be thinking about the family and the circumstances as they're unfolding and the agony that they're going through. Obviously, we want the investigation to be now completed so that we can get to the absolute bottom of this. There will be a review, so if there have been mistakes along the way, the review will get to the bottom of those mistakes. But I think, look, the Lancashire Constabulary have been working really hard. Let the investigation, go its full length now. Let's have that review, and then we can see whether the judgments were the right judgments. In my experience, when I was Director of Public Prosecutions, very often when there is a review, some judgments which at the time didn't seem particularly appropriate are capable of being explained.
Sir Keir Starmer speaking a little earlier. Let's get the views now. Martin Underhill, former police crime commissioner and indeed senior detective with Sussex Police in the Sarah Payne inquiry, joining us once more. Martin, thank you for your time. One reflects now, with all the politicians joining in the discussion on this, it's going to be perhaps less than helpful for Lancashire Police.
Yes, of course, our thoughts go to Nicola's family and friends, but you're right, this is unhelpful for Lancashire Police. And of course, we now know, well, we're pretty sure that this is Nicola in the river. I think what Keir Starmer's just said is true. It's something I've been saying for 2 weeks. There are questionable decisions that have been made in this case, but they may well be justifiable. And actually, we do need an external force to review the investigation, the media strategy, which has attracted most attention, the TikTok detectives that we've never seen before. And now, of course, the question's being asked about how was Nicola missed in the river, bearing in mind it wasn't a tidal river, it wasn't flying that fast. People are a bit surprised that she's suddenly been found less than a mile from where she went missing. So there are quite a few questions, and Lancashire Police are under the spotlight.
And just to bring up that issue of TikTok, social media and the media involvement itself, of course, when you were involved in the Sarah Payne investigation, social media not as prevalent and certainly not as aggressive, but you still had to have a relationship with the media. And in those days, I guess there was a conduit, if you like, between detectives and reporters, so that they were aware of some information, even though they were asked not to put it into the public domain.
Yes, it's interesting how the Leveson inquiry is suddenly featured in today's news. A lot of police officers are arguing that since Leveson, they don't contact the press as much as they used to, and the relationship doesn't exist. Arguably, the press should be independent from the police. So there's two sides to that argument, Mark.
Yeah.
But the point is, the TikTok detectives, and I have said this for a while, they filled the landscape. They made the noise because the police didn't. The police should have owned that landscape. They should have been doing press briefings every day because they didn't. Social media, some toxic social media, and TikTok detectives took over. And my worry is that Policing UK now has to deal with this template the next time we have a high-profile missing person. So I totally support Keir Starmer and the Home Secretary in saying we do need to learn the lessons. And actually, I'm not convinced the IOPC is the right body. It needs an external force. Metropolitan Police have already offered to help to review this in a completely objective way and let the Bulley family grieve the tragic loss of Nicola.
Indeed, because one of the central questions, I guess, would be in terms of the logistics of the police operation, which an independent outside force would look at, in that we spoke to Bob Eastwood earlier, former chief superintendent in Lancashire, his understanding that there was no kind of communication between Lancashire and this independent diving team that came in to search the river with their sonar equipment. Now, as a former senior detective, how do you view that and the fact that they were let loose, if you like, on the river to actually look at areas where may have direct evidence of what happened?
Well, again, another lesson to be learned, and I support what Bob said. What I've heard from people at the scene is that the search team came in because the family asked them to come in and the police don't own the river. But actually, it's quite staggering to think that happened. And of course, we know that the search team are complaining they weren't properly briefed by the police. So I think we have to bring in some guidelines as to who searches where. Certainly with Sarah Payne, I had 13 ologists. I had the RAF doing flypasts, trying to find grave sites. And everything was done with our knowledge and mainly at our request.
Right.
So there are numerous lessons to be learned here. But of course, it doesn't take away the fact poor old Nicola, we think, is going to be confirmed to be dead today.
Yeah, obviously that formal identification yet to take place. We don't know that. But last thought for you, and that is that very early on they were indicating they did not think this was a criminal investigation. And that did bring a lot of reaction from the public. Was that a mistake that perhaps they should have said openly, you know, we are just treating it as we get the evidence and finding out what's gone on?
Well, as we know, because we've all lived this journey with the Bulley family, there are 7 scenarios as to what happened to Nicola, and those 7 scenarios still stand. Lancashire Police closed down 6 of them 3 days into the inquiry. I am still staggered by that, as are numerous other people watching from the outside.
Yeah.
And of course, by shutting down the other lines of inquiry, they could have arguably missed some evidence. So an inquiry further down the line will establish what went right and what went wrong. There's no doubt in my mind that an awful lot of dedicated professional officers in Lancashire Police trying to resolve this issue, but we have to accept mistakes were made.
Martin, as ever, thank you for joining us on GB News. Martin Underhill, former senior detective and Police Crime Commission too. Thank you very much indeed. More, of course, from Lancashire as we get it. But let's reflect now on President Biden's surprise trip to Ukraine ahead of the 1-year anniversary, rather, since Russia invaded. And President Biden hitting out against President Putin by saying that the Russian president was dead wrong for thinking that Ukraine was weak and the West was divided. Also announcing a new $500 million military aid package, including ammunition, howitzers and Javelin missiles. Well, the president will continue the trip with a 3-day tour of Poland. Let's get more now with our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, joining us from Westminster. And it really was a surprise, Darren. We understand that he came across the border from Poland by train. Clearly, security is a concern because we even heard the air raid sirens when he was on walkabout.
Yeah, indeed. A pretty brief visit, must be said, though. Interestingly, it's been revealed in the last couple of minutes, Mark, to bleed into that point you were just talking about there, is that the US had given Moscow notice that President Biden was going to do this. Jake O'Sullivan, who's the National Security Advisor of the US, has confirmed that the Pentagon essentially was in touch with Moscow to allow this visit to go ahead, if you like. So it's clear that the Kremlin would have known that President Biden was due to be in Kyiv this morning. But as always, you know, it's the US president, the leader of the free world. There was a lot of security there today. As I said, a pretty brief trip, though it's part of a wider trip where President Biden is going to spend 3 days in Europe, most notably in Poland. But you're right in saying this is a trip based on symbolism, but also on practical benefits as well. First of all, that symbolism that the United States stands with Ukraine, stands with President Zelensky, with the Ukrainian people, with the Western alliance. President Biden talked an awful lot about how there were countries from across the world, from the Atlantic to the Pacific, who supported Ukraine, and that also that they would continue to support Ukraine until the end of this war. But also, which of course is important, I mean, we know that symbolism is important. In fact, lots of reporters have been speaking to Ukrainians in the last couple of hours, talking about how it is vitally important that the United States has got confidence in Ukraine and will continue to support it. But of course, confidence in itself doesn't win battles. And as you say, the United States announced an extra 500 million quid's worth of weapons to be pledged to Ukraine in the weeks, months and years to come. That's in addition to around 30 billion in total, not just weapons, but aid as well, that it's been given by the United States to Ukraine in the last year or so. That includes that extra ammunition, those anti-armor weapons, and of course those tanks as well. All this ahead of real concern across the Western world that Moscow is going to launch a second push, if you like, in the coming weeks, particularly in the Donbass region, to try and regain some of the territory they have lost, having gained it last year in the initial stages of the war.
Yeah. Indeed. I mean, a very obvious message to the Kremlin in terms of these pictures. But is it overly cynical for us to reflect maybe as well? This is President Biden perhaps preparing the ground for a re-election as president, and the fact that, you know, a foreign policy success and a defence of democracy could play quite well for him.
Yeah, I think possibly, Mark. What I would say is that this war's not been, terribly controversial to date. Yes, there have been concerns, particularly in the Republican Party, about the amount of money being spent, and there are some dissenting voices. But on the whole, actually, there's been quite a lot of political unity, and that's not often found in the United States these days when it comes to the war in Ukraine. Joe Biden, of course, there's lots of suggestions about whether he's going to declare for a second term. Wartime presidents, the symbolism, the pictures emanating from Kyiv today are not going to do him any harm, as you rightly pointed out. I think today there was much more about two things. First of all, this week marks the one-year anniversary since the invasion. Lots of world leaders have been in Kyiv in recent months, from Rishi Sunak, our Prime Minister, through to European leaders. In fact, the European Commission had a meeting in Kyiv not that long ago. President Biden clearly wanted to join those leaders. But in the end, there is real concern about trying to keep this coalition on the road and trying to keep support for Ukraine up. And that, I think, is what this visit to Europe is really fundamentally all about. It comes at the same time, just finally on this, Mark, that one of China's top diplomats is in Moscow. Yeah. And we heard that over the weekend, didn't we, from the United States, that there is concern that China's going to up its support for Moscow, potentially with the supply of weapons. And that's why the next couple of weeks and months could be quite crucial.
Indeed. Darren, thank you for that thought. Indeed, we'll be looking at that issue of China's involvement a little later here on GB News Live. Thank you very much for the moment. More, of course, on the President's visit. More on what's happening in Scotland. Who will be the leader of Scotland? Kate Forbes has put her hat into the ring for the leadership. But is there now a Stop Kate coalition? We'll be getting the latest from Scotland. Let's get an update on the weather for you now.
Hello, I'm Alex Deakin, and this is your latest weather update from the Met Office. Gusty winds across much of the north today. They'll be steadily easing through the day. Bit of rain across Scotland, but most places dry and, for most of us, pretty mild. We've got low to the north, a high to the south, and in between this weather front, that's where we're seeing the thickest cloud and a little bit of rain. But the isobars fairly tightly packed as well. It is quite gusty, particularly over northeast England and northern Scotland. Staying fairly damp through the central belts. Bit of drizzle over the Cumbrian Fells and over Snowdonia, but most places dry, and actually some decent spells of sunshine over parts of the Midlands, East Anglia and the southeast. And it is mild, so temperatures into the teens. 14, 15 Celsius where we see some sunshine. Cooler further north, but even here temperatures are a touch above average for the time of year, but feeling a bit colder with the winds. Those winds will continue to ease through this evening. The rain should clear away from the central belts, but fairly damp nights across parts of western Scotland. Otherwise, again, most places dry. Could be some mist and fog. We'll generally just keep a lot of cloud. And look at these temperatures overnight, staying at 7 or 8 Celsius, so a very mild start to Tuesday. Tuesday, again, mild, dry and cloudy for the majority. It won't be as windy as today across the north. We will see some rain clearing away initially from northern Scotland, but then pushing back into the Western Isles later. Elsewhere, again, bar a bit of drizzle over coast and hills, most places dry. But a cloudier day for the Midlands and East Anglia. And perhaps not quite as mild, but still temperatures double digits almost across the board. We might get up into the teens in one or two places. North East Scotland may well see some breaks in the cloud and some sunny spells. But in the west, signs of a change through Tuesday evening. A weather front, this line of rain is a weather front moving in. And it's a cold front as well. So it will be introducing colder air. Some showery rain on Wednesday, but still a lot of dry weather and just turning a little chillier. Goodbye.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online. Across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now, welcome back. Whither Scotland, I hear you cry, or at least if you're north of the border, you may be crying that. Kate Forbes, Scotland's Finance Secretary, has now announced she'll be putting her hat into the ring for the SNP leadership contest to replace this particular lady, Nicola Sturgeon. Meanwhile, Scotland's, that's Angus Robertson, actually, who is not going to be running, I don't think. And we've got Hamza Yousaf, who's announced he will be going for the job. There he is with his face mask, the health secretary there, and indeed also Ash Regan, who will be putting it in for 3 runners so far. Will that be it? We have the views of our political reporter, Olivia Utley, joining us in the studio. Not that many candidates. Is it the job maybe no one wants?
Not that many candidates. It is looking like a pretty uphill battle for the SNP now. We knew last week that it was very good news indeed for Labour when Nicola Sturgeon took herself out of the race. The SNP is beset with internal division, really, and that's already beginning to show its face in this early days contest. We've got Kate Forbes, who is very popular among many people inside the party. She's Cambridge educated. She's a rising star. She's considered very much on the money. She's definitely got her friends in the party, but she is not the same sort of progressive, as it were, brand of the SNP that Nicola Sturgeon was presenting. She's a conservative-minded, socially Christian in her beliefs, and she's actually pretty much centre-right on economic issues. She also disagrees with the Gender Recognition Act, which is obviously an extremely contentious issue inside the SNP. Then on the other side, we've got Hamza Yousaf, who's the sort of continuity candidate, and Sturgeon's allies are sort of rallying around him now, and it's thought that he's the sort of stop Kate candidate.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is interesting. It's not necessarily, vote the best person for the job, that the legacy of Nicola Sturgeon and what some would interpret as the SNP sort of fairly hard left stance, that they want to continue that, and they see Kate Forbes as not being of that mould. She is far more perhaps acceptable to business, and indeed that the Scottish Tories might want her as a political ally.
Well, yes, but the Scottish Tories are pretty scared of her because they're more scared of her than anyone else, partly because of this issue of the Gender Recognition Act, which she would be willing to throw out. And that obviously is a really good campaigning tool for the Conservative Party. They know how unpopular the Gender Recognition Act is in Scotland, and it's useful to them to be able to...
that actually did for Nicola Sturgeon in the end. That's the other question.
Yes, exactly. The problem for Kate Forbes, though, if she did get in, is she would be beset with difficulties from day one. There would be a lot of people in her own party, the members of her own party, who tend to be very left-wing and very young, don't like her and could cause her problems. But the main issue is that at the moment the SNP are in coalition with the Green Party, and the Green Party have already indicated that they would they were likely to withdraw from that coalition were Kate Forbes to become leader. She's been openly critical of the Green Party, said that they're not really interested in doing green things anymore, they're just concerned with their very left-wing agenda, and they were the faces, really, of the Gender Recognition Act, which she disagrees with. So there is a big possibility that were Kate Forbes to become leader, the SNP would lose its majority in Holyrood. Now, it would only lose its majority by 1, so she would still be able to probably get most things through on a sort of case-by-case basis, but it wouldn't be great for the SNP heading into the next election.
And this relationship with the party in Westminster. I'm just reading a bit more now that Joanna Cherry, who is quite influential, but the Westminster rump, if you like, giving her back into Ash Regan, citing her solid left-wing credentials. So this is a real battle about heart and soul of where the party goes. And independence at the moment doesn't seem to be mentioned in all this.
Well, Ash Regan, in a way, seems to be the most pushing the most pro-independence lines. What she's saying, and she's the only one who's really talked about this, is her strategy to gain independence would be to turn not only the next election into a de facto referendum, but every subsequent election into a de facto referendum until independence was achieved.
People get so fed up with it.
Well, yes, and of course that was another issue which one could say was the nail in the coffin of Nicola Sturgeon's premiership, because she said that she wanted to make the next election into a referendum, and only 21% of the Scottish public agreed with her. And that was actually the very first time we started to see the SNP ranks at the top of the party really breaking up, because her close allies were criticising her for this approach, saying that there are too many issues in Scotland to make the election a one-issue vote. So it'll be very interesting to see what Yousaf and Forbes say about independence in the coming days, because, as you say, at the moment, it's more about what political direction the SNP takes. Is it a left-wing progressive outfit, or is it simply a pro-independence campaigning party?
And then, of course, all the real political issues about health, about poverty, about drugs and so on.
Taking a back seat.
Yeah. Olivia, thank you very much indeed. Well, that's the situation about Scotland. What about Northern Ireland? Rishi Sunak facing a setback, it seems, after a backlash from senior Tories and unionists. But we're being told there is a video conference call between the Foreign Secretary and also the Northern Ireland Secretary and the EC this afternoon, European Commission. What could that reveal? We'll be looking at that in more detail. First, an update on the headlines with Tamsin.
Mark, thank you. Good afternoon from the GB Newsroom. It's 1:34. Here are the headlines. President Biden has promised more than $500 million worth of aid to Ukraine after making a surprise trip to its capital. It comes just days before the first anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion. Mr. Zelensky said the visit was an extremely important sign of support for all Ukrainians. The US president said his country would stand with Ukraine for as long as it takes.
Putin thought Ukraine was weak and the West was divided. As you know, Mr. President, I said to you in the beginning, he's counting on us not sticking together. He was counting on the inability to keep NATO united. He was counting on us not to be able to bring in others on the side of Ukraine. He thought he could outlast us. I don't think he's thinking that right now. God knows what he's thinking. I don't think he's thinking that.
The partner of missing mother of two, Nicola Bulley, has spoken of the family's agony after a body was found yesterday in the river near to where she went missing. Lancashire police are working to provide a formal identification of the body, which was found in the water around a mile from where Nicola was last seen. They're currently treating the death as unexplained. The 45-year-old disappeared more than 3 weeks ago whilst walking her dog. More than 11,000 healthcare workers from the GMB and Unite unions in England and Wales are walking out today in their continuing dispute over pay and staffing. The workers striking include ambulance workers, paramedics and call handlers. GMB says it's over a month since the government engaged in meaningful dialogue. Elsewhere, the result of a ballot of around 45,000 junior doctors is expected to be announced later today by the British Medical Association. That's all from me for now. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Back to GB News Live. We've been talking about Scotland. Let's now turn our attention to Northern Ireland because Rishi Sunak seeing his plans for a deal on the protocol may be suffering a setback following this backlash from some senior Tory backbenchers and unionists too. The ERG group to meet tomorrow, we're told. Pressure growing on the Prime Minister as government sources say tense talks in Downing Street over the weekend on overhauling the protocol yet to yield a breakthrough, we're being told. Meanwhile, in Stormont, Democratic Unionist Party leader Sir Geoffrey Donaldson saying the big moment had arrived and that the next decision by London and Brussels will have profound consequences. Let's get the views now of Amanda Ferguson, journalist and political commentator, who joins us. And Amanda, we've got suggestions that we've got this conference call this afternoon, possibly between James Cleverly, Foreign Secretary, Northern Ireland Secretary Chris Heaton-Harris and the European Commissioner Markos Šefčovič. So is this the big moment, maybe?
Well, I think it's clear that the engagement is continuing. Everybody knows that. I think there's a real desire to get this wrapped up. I think towards the end of last week, people were sure it was going to be today or tomorrow. And now the reporting indicates it could be the middle of the week at the earliest before there is a breakthrough. But I think Maros Šefčovič is very aware that some biggest challenges that Rishi Sunak faces is selling whatever deal he has to the ERG and to the DUP in Northern Ireland. And we've had the DUP MP Sammy Wilson speaking this morning saying that he very much doubts that there'll be a conclusion this week. But as ever with these kind of stories, there's been so much misinformation. And as the Taoiseach Micheál Martin pointed out today, there's been a bit of power play going on. So he called today for that to end and for a resolution for the people of Northern Ireland who are currently without fully functioning government.
Indeed, misinformation or perhaps no information at all, which is the other difficulty. But let's talk about the consequences, therefore. As you say, the ERG to meet tomorrow, the DUP indicating that they believe some kind of decision is imminent. Do the two of them now actually have a part in the process? Because we've got Sir Keir Starmer for Labour saying they will vote with the Prime Minister in the Commons. So therefore, perhaps the senior Tory backbenchers won't be able to swing a vote against it. And suggestions in the Times newspaper at the weekend that Rishi Sunak may actually go ahead with an agreement without the DUP. Where does that leave the process?
Well, the consequences of not including all of the Northern Ireland parties and the Northern Ireland business community is that there probably won't be a restoration of Stormont. And if that is the case, then what's been the point of the renegotiated deal? We know that the DUP has said it's 7 tests. There was some talk this morning from Sammy Wilson and last night from Lord Nigel Dodds about the Northern Ireland Protocol bill must still progress while this is ongoing. However, I think that there's an acceptance perhaps that the Northern Ireland Protocol bill may be illegal and that the government wouldn't want to lose the inevitable court case that will be linked to that. So there's no real confirmation whether that's a DUP party line today so far from the DUP, although they have been asked. But I think that, the Northern Ireland business community has been included in the process in terms of being consulted all the way along with questions, but not down to the fine detail of will this work for you, won't this work for you? And we don't have fully functioning government in Northern Ireland because of the DUP's block on Stormont. It sees it as its only leverage in the process because it's not directly involved in the negotiations. But it should be pointed out as well that while the DUP is a considerable presence in Northern Ireland politics, it's the second largest party in Northern Ireland. It has a very important voice. It does command 20 to 30% of the vote. So it's not the majority, and also majority of MLAs at Stormont back retaining the protocol and resolving all the outstanding issues. So I think there's just a sense perhaps within the political world and within the media world that we want to get this story completed, but sometimes when it comes to Ireland, there never is an end to it.
Yeah, is that the driving force, that everyone just wants some kind of conclusion to this? And looking at what we're hearing from Dublin and Micheál Martin, any negotiated outcome between the UK and the EU would transcend anything else, full stop.
Well, we know that the renegotiation is ongoing because of the impact that the post-Brexit trading arrangements and political disquiet around that is having on devolution in Northern Ireland. Stormont isn't progressing through with all of the laws and all of the legislation that the people here want to be delivered. Only today, the Secretary of State, Chris Eaton-Harris, announced that Westminster will progress the organ donation legislation through Westminster rather than it being done in Northern Ireland. And there's a lot, there's a list there, as long as your arm, of issues that need to be resolved. And the civil servants that are in charge of those Stormont departments at the moment don't have the authority to take ministerial decisions. They have limited powers in what they can do. Certainly they can take some decisions, but it's not the normal functioning of government. And then, of course, we know that while the Secretary of State has plans to introduce the legislation to kick the can down the road regarding another election, that he also reserves the right to call that at any time. So we're far from a done deal until I think everybody sees the final draft of the final text of the deal, and then will be judged on what the parties want, and it won't only be just what the unionist parties want.
A few more kicking of cans, maybe, as the process has been for some time, of course, some would say. Amanda Ferguson, thank you very much indeed for your reflections, and we'll see what the video conference call brings to us a little later. Let's reflect now on the latest on the energy issue, because January, which is being told, has seen the highest uptake of energy bill support reaching vulnerable households, although many of course, still missing out. Data from the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, as it's called now, showing those on prepayment meters used 1.7 million vouchers in January alone, but the fewest households making use of the support in London, with more than a third of vouchers remaining unclaimed. Let's get more now with our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan. Liam, do you remember that there was this sort of public appeal for those people that hadn't actually claimed to go and try and find if they had the vouchers and to actually cash them in effectively? Is that what's happened, that public sort of relations campaign has worked?
To some extent, but there's still a lot of people who haven't claimed these vouchers, unfortunately, and we must be concerned for them because fuel bills have been sky high.
Yeah.
We're coming into a real sort of moment for energy bills, Mark, in the run-up to this budget. Ofgem, the energy regulator, is due to raise the energy price cap from £2,500 to £3,000 a year. In theory, that could put bills up. Yeah. On the other hand, Mark, as you and I have talked about regularly here on GB News, wholesale energy prices are coming down. The price of oil and gas are now well below where they were when Russia invaded Ukraine a year ago, this coming Friday, the 24th of February. Now, if energy bills do actually go up this spring at a time when wholesale prices are coming down, that's going to be really, really difficult for the government and the broader kind of political class to explain. And it will revolve around something that I've been writing about recently.
The Telegraph this weekend.
Sort of marginal cost pricing, the idea that because there's intermittency from renewables, sometimes the price of energy goes up because they have to, at short notice, fire up gas-fired power stations, even coal-fired power stations. And then the rules under privatisation and since have been that all providers then get that amount of money, and then the energy companies actually sell us the energy. They then have to pay more. Energy regulation in this country, Mark, and the way the energy market works or doesn't, I hesitate to use this word on national television, but it's a bit of a mess.
Yeah.
And consumers, whether they're relatively vulnerable households, with all respect to them, on prepayment meters, or whether they're well-heeled people in big houses, almost none of us seem to be getting any of the benefit of the fact that renewables have been subsidised for years.
Yeah.
And when they work, they are actually cheaper.
Yeah, and of course, what that renewable sector costs us in terms of subsidy and so on, and what happens, as you say, when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine. Yeah. Given that, where's your estimate on where we're going to be in this next year? Because it's not just houses, but businesses as well are trying to do their sums on what their energy consumption bill will be. And at the moment, it seems, it's still up there, isn't it?
So we are now in the run-up to the March 15th budget, and it's going to be a really important budget because, quite frankly, the country has been through the economic ringer, if you like. We've had a cost of living crisis. We may still yet go into recession, though we seem to have dodged that particular bullet for now. And in the run-up to the budget, energy is very high on the agenda. How's the government going to work out this rise in the Ofgem energy price cap? Also, as you say, Mark, the fact that almost all companies, many of which have been receiving help with their energy bills, that support is due to completely disappear unless you're a very, very high energy intensive user like a steelmaker. But you can still be a manufacturer whose energy bill has doubled, tripled, quadrupled, and you're not going to get any government support at all. You could be a publican, a hotelier, all of which energy is a big part of their bills. They're going to get no support at all. And that's why a lot of business leaders, and indeed a lot of politicians, particularly on the Tory side, are so concerned, Mark, in the run-up to this budget, that the government has already legislated, when Rishi Sunak was the Chancellor before the Chancellor before the Chancellor last spring, March 2022, that budget said in March 2023, corporation tax is going to go up from 19 to 25%.
And?
There is now a very serious campaign going on, letter writing, public acclamation by leading Conservative backbenchers and backbench kind of lobby groups, the European Research Group, the No Turning Back Group, the Conservative Growth Group. If you add up all those MPs, that's far bigger. They could overturn the government's majority, and they are now calling on Rishi Sunak. They wrote a letter over the weekend. They are calling on Rishi Sunak to not increase corporation tax from 19 to 25%, to freeze it where it is. This isn't a tax cut, it's a freeze, but it will feel like a cut because for the last year, the legislation's been there that this price tax rate is going to go up.
And therefore, just very quickly, how could they do that? It's enacted, as we were told, for the legislation.
You just have any budget. After a budget, there's what's called the finance bill, which then goes through Parliament, and it's almost unheard of that a finance bill doesn't sort of go through on the nod. You know, opposition may try and amend it and be a bit mischievous, but obviously this is the flagship government policy. You just put in the new finance bill, the fact that the bit in the old finance bill, you know, the architectural plumbing is not difficult. The architectural arithmetic, the parliamentary arithmetic may be very tough.
So it's just the one page that's missing in the photocopy before it comes through to the Commons Office. Right,
we shall see.
We shall see, indeed. And, of course, full coverage of that budget here on GB News Live for you. Now, let's turn back to the international picture with the US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, saying that China may supply weapons to Russia for that war in Ukraine, going on to warn there would be serious consequences if they were thinking of getting involved. Meanwhile, China's foreign ministry have said that the US is in no position to demand China and do not accept pressure or coercion. That was the language they used. Well, China's top diplomat Wang Yi has now arrived in Moscow for talks about Ukraine today. President Zelensky, of course, warning if China ally with Russia, there will be a world war, as he said a little earlier. Joining us now is Simon Diggins, former defence attaché. Simon, thank you for your time. And this, of course, very much in the fore with President Biden visiting Kyiv today and announcing, I think, about $500,000 in more ammunition, Javelin missiles, howitzers and so on. What could the Chinese be supplying for the Russians on the other side?
I think what the Chinese are particularly up by, I think it's $500 million, not $500,000, but never mind. $500 million.
Oh, I do. Yes,
from President Biden.
Yeah, I do. I apologise for that slip. Yeah,
that's all right. I mean, what the Russians will be after are some of the precision missiles, which they got through very quickly at the beginning of the campaign last year. And I don't know enough detail about whether those weapon systems are easily compatible with Russian weapon systems or whether they're new systems they can use. But they did get through an awful lot of their more modern weapon systems, which is why in the latter stages of last year, we saw increasing use of what you might call rather old-fashioned shells, rockets and missiles, which were a lot less precise and a lot more accepting, if you like, of collateral damage. From there. So I think that's the key thing. It gives them a reserve, which they haven't currently got.
OK, and would the worry be that China provides some high-tech, long-range armaments, which, of course, would be a worry in that we don't seem to be providing Ukraine with air cover in terms of these modern jets they want?
Yeah, I mean, and it's trying to get the right balance between them. But yes, it is precise that the technology advantage will then swing across back to the Russians from where they are. And as you rightly point out, we've not only been slow about providing things like the tanks, even though we're now promised of those, we have so far denied the Ukrainians a modern air force to try and, if not, you can't counter missiles with aircraft, but you can, if you like, balance up the overall advantage with a different technology advantage. So yes, the balance will go against the Ukraine if the Russians are able to secure Chinese high-tech supplies.
And what would it do for the bigger balance, bearing in mind the situation with Taiwan, if China did actively become involved? And already people have talked about this new Cold War between East and West.
I mean, I think that's it. I mean, there was a lot of speculation at the beginning of the campaign last year that China was, if you like, viewing what was happening in Ukraine as a bit of a dress rehearsal for what it might choose to do against Taiwan. And I think everyone's worried that they use the opportunity of the West perhaps being diverted elsewhere or other perceptions of Western weakness to attack Taiwan, and that would be a disastrous outcome. Yeah. The broader issue about is there a new Cold War is also on the cards, and it will take a lot of very deft diplomacy to try and persuade the Chinese it's really not in their interest to follow Putin into a what could be just a gross misadventure with really dangerous consequences for the world.
And, final thought. I mean, could Beijing actually be reconsidering, given what appears to be the failure of Soviet-era weaponry against advanced Western and US and UK kit?
No, I think they're doing that the whole time, but they've also got some advantages. We've seen them at the high tech end. I mean, they're the first to actively deploy these so-called hypersonic missiles. Which I think took everybody by surprise. And they are avid students of Western technology, Western ideas, and seeing how they can adopt them and adapt them for their own uses. So, I mean, it is, even if it's not an open arms race, there is definitely a sort of intelligence, commercial intelligence, information gathering arms race ongoing now, where they try and understand what advantage we may or might have.
Still worrying times. Simon, thank you very much indeed for updating us with your assessment of the situation. Now, to lighter matters, although it was still war at the forefront, the Bafta Awards last night, and it's the Netflix German film All Quiet on the Western Front that won a total of 7 awards and indeed appeared to steal the show. Best Actor Award going to Austin Butler for his portrayal, however, of Elvis Presley. And he dedicated his award to the Presley family. Well, joining us now is Katie Banks, showbiz journalist. Katie, so we got a German language film that's streamed, not even at the cinemas, making it as the best offering at the Bafta. It's quite a change in the sort of landscape, isn't it?
I think there was a quite big change last night, and it was quite interesting to see that maybe the films that aren't going sort of viral at the cinema and everyone's rushing to see are getting so much recognition. And maybe it's going to change the way they make films in the future and who they're trying to appeal to, because obviously it's become a much broader spectrum now of what they're looking at.
And the producers of All Quiet on the Western Front indicating that they tried, 16 years to get this film made, and the big film companies didn't want to know. And it's a streamer, Netflix, that's got it out to the public.
I think it's interesting how big the Netflix influence is now. I mean, it seems to be that so many of the movies now which aren't going to the cinema, you're finding them on Netflix first. Netflix had a huge party for all its stars last night, and there was a big emphasis on this. And streaming is going into a sort of an epic proportion now. So maybe people are just more interested now in seeing these big films in their own living rooms rather than making that trip to the cinema.
Pretty heavy offering, though. I mean, is it perhaps a reflection of the time that this anti-war film, as it is, makes it to the top of the tree, bearing in mind what we've just been discussing about Ukraine?
I think it is interesting. And then also you saw all the celebrities turning out on the red carpet with their blue ribbons. There was a lot of emphasis on the refugees, Syria, and the Turkish earthquake. And I think that it's not, people want to really draw attention to the issues close to their heart. It's not all about acting. And I think there's a lot more thought now going into these productions. Yeah. Politics and showbiz in a happy marriage for the moment, it seems, at least. Katie, thank you very much indeed. And, of course, our congratulations to all those winners. Thank you for your time. That's it for this hour. But coming up in the next hour, we'll be reflecting more on the Nicola Bulley investigation and where it goes now. But we will be back shortly.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB+ radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate. with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Very good afternoon to you. It's just gone 2 o'clock. You're with GB News Live with me, Mark Longhurst. And coming up for you this Monday afternoon, the Home Secretary saying she is not wholly satisfied with the conduct of Lancashire Police as pressure now mounts on the force over why it fell to local walkers to discover a body yesterday in the search for missing Nicola Bulley. But are they being scapegoated? We'll be asking a former top officer at the Metropolitan Police. President Biden making that surprise visit to the Ukrainian capital Kyiv, defying warnings of a Russian missile attack. The US president on a walkabout too in the centre of the city as the air sirens were being heard. We'll ask the head of a leading international think tank about whether it's symbolism towards the Kremlin. Could we be on the cusp of a Northern Ireland agreement, or has the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak been forced to take a step back because of a threatened rebellion by his own side? Our reporter Dougie Beattie at Stormont will give us the latest analysis. And is this woman, Scotland's 32-year-old Finance Secretary Kate Forbes, the front-runner to become First Minister? As SNP heavyweight Angus Robertson rules himself out, we'll have all the action on the runners and riders for Scotland's leadership. And as ever, get in touch with your views on the day, gbviews at gbnews.uk. We want to hear what you think. Before that, latest headlines with Tamsin.
Mark, thank you, and good afternoon from the GB Newsroom. It's 2 minutes past 2. President Biden has promised more than $500 million worth of aid to Ukraine after making a surprise trip to its capital. It comes just days before the first anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion. Mr. Zelensky said the visit was an extremely important sign of support for all Ukrainians. The US president said his country would stand with Ukraine for as long as it takes.
Putin thought Ukraine was weak and the West was divided. As you know, Mr. President, I said to you in the beginning, he's counting on us not sticking together. He was counting on the inability to keep NATO united. He was counting on us not to be able to bring in others on the side of Ukraine. He thought he could outlast us. I don't think he's thinking that right now. God knows what he's thinking, but I don't think he's thinking that.
The partner of missing mother of two, Nicola Bulley, has spoken of the family's agony after a body was found yesterday in the river near to where she went missing. Lancashire police are working to provide a formal identification of the body, which was found in the water around a mile from where Nicola was last seen. They're currently treating the death as unexplained. The 45-year-old disappeared more than 3 weeks ago whilst walking her dog. Peter Faulding, who led a private search of the river for Nicola, says he still doesn't believe she drowned.
If Nicola had fallen in the play at the bench where the phone was found, she would have landed in 2 feet of water. She would not have drowned at that location. I don't believe Nicola went in because the police divers searched that area thoroughly that afternoon and drowning victims go to the bottom. She could not have made it over the weir in a day. There's no way, and that my whole team and other police have looked at this. It baffled me.
More than 11,000 healthcare workers from the GMB and Unite unions in England and Wales are walking out today in their continuing dispute over pay and staffing. The workers striking include ambulance workers, paramedics and call handlers. GMB says it's over a month since the government engaged in meaningful dialogue. Elsewhere, the result of a ballot of around 45,000 junior doctors is expected to be announced later today by the British Medical Association. The Foreign and Northern Ireland secretaries are to speak with the European Commission Vice President later as negotiations continue over the Northern Ireland Protocol. Number 10 has denied reports the Prime Minister has been forced to delay announcing a breakthrough amid backlash from his own MPs. The DUP and backbench Tories say it won't support a deal which retains oversight from the European Court of Justice. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says there's a real window of opportunity to move forward.
The UK and the EU have obviously edged closer together. The question now is whether the Prime Minister is strong enough to get it through his own backbenchers. And what I've said is, on Northern Ireland, the national interest comes first. So we will put party politics to one side. We will vote with the government if there's a deal to vote for. And so the Prime Minister doesn't have to rely on his backbenchers. We in the Labour Party are putting country first and party second.
The most dangerous domestic abusers will be added to the sex offender register as the Home Office vows to treat violence against women as a national threat. The government plans to invest up to £8.4 million over the next 2 years to fund specialist support programmes for victims. Domestic abuse affected around 2.4 million people in England and Wales in the past year. Home Secretary Suella Braverman says the changes are needed.
I'm changing the law to ensure that there's more robust monitoring of perpetrators. We're introducing measures to ensure that we will be able to tag offenders of domestic abuse, and we will be also adding offenders of domestic abuse onto the Violent and Sex Offenders Register. And also, all police chiefs and forces around the country will now be put on a footing to deal with violence against women and girls as a national threat.
Finance Secretary Kate Forbes has announced her bid to become the new leader of the SNP and First Minister of Scotland. It's after Nicola Sturgeon's unexpected resignation last week. Former SNP Westminster leader Angus Robertson has ruled himself out of the leadership race, saying it's not the right time for him and his family. Scotland's Health Secretary Humza Yousaf has already confirmed he will run, as will former Community Safety Minister Ash Regan. The new SNP leader will be announced on the 27th of March. This is GB News. More from me shortly. Now, though, it's back to Mark.
Tamsin, thank you for that. So the partner of missing mum Nicola Bulley has described his agony after that body was found in the River Wyre in Lancashire, close to where she went missing. The body has not yet been formally identified, but was discovered yesterday by walkers, prompting yet more questions about the organisation of the police search and operation and indeed the private diving team who offered their assistance. Well, this morning, the Home Secretary said she was not wholly satisfied with the decision by police to release personal information about Nicola. This is what she had to say a little earlier.
Well, first of all, I want to put on record my deepest thoughts and sympathies for the family of Nicola Bulley. It must be a horrendous experience that they are going through right now. We need to let the police carry out and conclude their investigation. I did have concerns earlier in the week about some of the elements relating to the release of personal information of Nicola Bulley into the public domain. I raised those concerns with the Chief Constable. I wasn't wholly satisfied, I have to say, with some of the responses I got, but it is a matter for the police themselves. There are some investigations ongoing looking into how the investigation's been handled, and we must let that carry out its own process. But we must just let the investigation conclude, and then we will see what the investigations and the inquiries come back with.
Let's get the very latest at St Michael's on Wire with Sophie Reaper, our correspondent who's been following this story from the beginning. And Sophie, as we've been reflecting, our hearts go out, of course, to the family and friends. Still no formal identification of this body, and still more questions being asked now by these senior politicians as well about the whole police operation.
Absolutely, Mark. There's been controversy around this case since the very beginning. Of course, we had the issues where they released that information, questions about whether or not that was appropriate to do. There was the dispersal order because police said that armchair detectives were disrupting the case. There's been huge police presence, and now, of course, questions asked about why, if it was Nicola Bulley, why they didn't find the body sooner. Of course, it was yesterday that we learned that a body had been recovered from the River Wire as part of that investigation into the missing case of Nicola Bulley. But as we say, we don't know for definite. It's worth reiterating that it has not been formally identified as the mother of two. We're waiting to hear from Lancashire Police one way or another. It's now been 25 days that Nicola Bulley has been missing, just over 3 weeks since she disappeared on Friday, the 27th of January. We know that morning that she loaded her car, took her two children to the local primary school, and then continued on a dog walk that she would do on a regular basis. On the bridge behind me, there's yellow ribbons with messages asking Nicola to come home, things that say things like, "We miss seeing you on our regular dog walks." She's clearly a well-recognised figure in the community, and people have been desperate to have some answers to this, and it sounds like we may perhaps get some kind of answer one way or another in the coming hours. But of course, many people, not just the people of St Michael's-on-Wye, not just Nicola's friends and family. This has been a case that has gripped the UK, and many people will be waiting for answers.
Yeah, and of course that's created its own difficulty in the village, as you've been indicating to us. We were talking to these former senior policemen that refer to these TikTokers, people posing as members of the media and going on their own searches and so on, at a time when, of course, many in the village were generally trying to find out what had been going on.
Absolutely, and I think really the main issue with that, I think, that the family have had is the insensitivity, but also it just gets in the way. Police have been very grateful, they've said, for all of the assistance they've had from members of the public. They told us last week at a press conference they've had over 1,500 pieces of information sent into them. But of course, it just becomes too much when armchair detectives and amateur sleuths are getting involved and trying to find out what may have happened, which of course is also going to be quite upsetting for members of Nicola's friends and family.
Yeah, indeed, and still no certainties, as we were discussing, but I gather those police officers and the community support officers still there at St Michael's-on-Wye. Sophie, as ever, thank you for updating us with the very latest there in Lancashire. Let's get the views now of Parm Sandhu, former Chief Superintendent at the Met Police, who joins us. And Parm, we've been reflecting that the politicians now getting involved in this whole sort of circus concerning Lancashire Police, which may be not that helpful for the detectives directly involved. But clearly there are two separate areas, it seems, to be addressed. That is the search operation itself and how a body was not found earlier. And then secondly, this whole release of information regarding Nicola and her personal circumstances.
Good afternoon. Yes, it has become a bit of a circus with so many different interventions from so many different people. But what we've got to remember is there is a body there that hasn't been identified yet, and that identification is imminent, so it will be in the next few hours or so. And then when we look at if it is or isn't, then that's when the questions will be asked. There's already been 3 reviews announced into this investigation. There's an internal review being done by Lancashire Police. There's a review being done by the IOPC, who are the police watchdog, and a third one which is being done by the information commissioners. And as you quite rightly said, there are 2 different parts to this. One is the investigation and the other one is the communication strategy. And when you look at it as an outsider, Lancashire Police have dedicated a team of detectives, 40 or 50 people. They've had search and rescue, they've had drones, helicopters. They've put a lot of effort into this investigation, and you have to recognise that, because there are about between 150 and 170,000 people who are reported missing every year. They don't get this level of investigation, and this one has. And it's because of that public interest that this one has stayed in the public media as much as it has.
And this, perhaps to remind people, is standard procedure for police inquiries. It is useful for them to bring the public in as their eyes and ears, so that any evidence of sightings or vehicles, you know, and we hear these appeals about dash cam footage and so on, that is now part of normal everyday policing.
It is, because it's the public who help the police officers solve crimes. Police officers don't have the answers. And it may be a member of public who's seen a vehicle, a person, and this is right across the board in any type of investigation. You need the support of the public and the local community to put those pieces of jigsaw together to solve the incident or the crime. But there is a fine line between genuine helping members of the public and those people who have got social media channels of their own and are using it to further their own careers as such.
And just to get your view as a former senior police officer about the involvement of the politicians now, is one of the problems about all these inquiries that are launched that it becomes a blame game, that someone has to take the fall for this in the end?
Absolutely, and I have seen some of the press conferences, and it's not right to be defensive, because if you're defensive, then you can't acknowledge the need for change, not necessarily acknowledge mistakes if there are none. And I'm sure that the review will, you know, it's not for me to say, that's for the review to say, but you've got to be open to make a change and make different decisions going forward. And I think those decisions will be around the social media and the media and communication strategy that was used in this case.
Yeah. Palm, thank you very much indeed for your view on that. And of course, we'll see what continues with the formal investigation and identification of the body to come. Let's just update you with a case at the Old Bailey, some details just coming through from Press Association. And they're hearing evidence that a Metropolitan Police officer raped a woman having flashed his warrant card in a nightclub nearly 20 years ago. Stephen Keir is on trial at the Old Bailey, accused of having sex with a woman without her consent after going back to her home after a night out in April 2004. The case reopened, we're told, after the alleged victim wrote to the Metropolitan Police Commissioner in 2018 about what she said was an injustice she felt years after the case was closed. Defendant now retired from the Metropolitan Police, charged with rape and indecent assault, which he denies. The trial continuing, and the evidence that he had, as we say, used the warrant card in that process. So we'll keep our eyes on that as that evidence is given in court and update you on the hearing itself and the evidence that they're hearing. But still to come also, we'll be updating you on the situation in Ukraine with that surprise visit by President Biden. Plenty to come, including all the reaction. First, weather details for you.
Hello, I'm Alex Deakin, and this is your latest weather update from the Met Office. Gusty winds across much of the north today. They'll be steadily easing through the day. Bit of rain across Scotland, but most places dry and, for most of us, pretty mild. We've got low to the north, a high to the south, and in between this weather front, that's where we're seeing the thickest cloud and a little bit of rain. But the isobars fairly tightly packed as well. It is quite gusty, particularly over northeast England and northern Scotland. Staying fairly damp through the central belts, bit of drizzle over the Cumbrian Fells and over Snowdonia, but most places dry, and actually some decent spells of sunshine over parts of the Midlands, East Anglia and the southeast. And it is mild, so temperatures into the teens, 14, 15 Celsius, where we see some sunshine. Cooler further north, but even here temperatures are a touch above average for the time of year, but feeling a bit colder with the winds. Those winds will continue to ease through this evening. The rain should clear away from the central belt, but fairly damp nights across parts of western Scotland. Otherwise, again, most places dry. Could be some mist and fog. We'll generally just keep a lot of cloud. And look at these temperatures overnight, staying at 7 or 8 Celsius, so a very mild start to Tuesday. Tuesday, again, mild, dry and cloudy for the majority. It won't be as windy as today across the north. We will see some rain clearing away initially from northern Scotland, but then pushing back into the Western Isles later. Elsewhere, again, bar a bit of drizzle over coast and hills, most places dry. But a cloudier day for the Midlands and East Anglia. And perhaps not quite as mild, but still temperatures double digits almost across the board. We might get up into the teens in one or two places. North East Scotland may well see some breaks in the cloud and some sunny spells. But in the west, signs of a change through Tuesday evening. A weather front, this line of rain is a weather front moving in. And it's a cold front as well. So it will be introducing colder air. Some showery rain on Wednesday, but still a lot of dry weather and just turning a little chillier. Goodbye.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing. You see, amazing.
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
More now on that surprise trip by President Biden to Ukraine ahead of the anniversary since Russia invaded the country. We say surprise, but we're now learning that the White House, in fact, warned the Kremlin before he made that visit, according to the National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, who said, "We did not notify the Russians that he would be travelling, but we did so some hours before his departure for deconfliction purposes." That's the language they've used in Washington. But as he visited, President Biden hitting out against President Putin by saying the Russian president was dead wrong for thinking that Ukraine was weak and that the West was divided, also announcing a new $500 million military aid package, including ammunition, howitzers and javelins. Well, let's speak now to the Ukrainian MP, Kira Rudik, who joins us once more. Thank you very much indeed for your time once more here on GB News. Did you have any indication that Joe Biden was about to visit you?
Hello, thank you so much for having me. No, absolutely no indication. And one can only imagine what the security teams were going through to make sure that President was able to get to Ukraine and spend his time here safely. We know that Russia was warned, but also we know that Putin sometimes has no limits and does not think clearly. This is why we are really happy that the visit happened without, any significant obstacles. And indeed, it was thrilling and super exciting news for all Ukrainian people.
Yeah, I gather he made a 10-hour train journey from Poland and came across the border that way instead of actually flying directly into Ukraine, given the sensitive nature. But are you surprised that the Americans warned the Kremlin that he would be making this visit?
Well, if you look at this situation in a broad matter, something that we wished that would happen, that President Biden and leaders of the democratic world would stop playing the reactive role and start playing an upper hand, the first hand in these relations. It happened. And warning Kremlin, yes, I'm going to Kyiv, is saying, yeah, we are playing the first hand right now.
Yeah, and clearly the message in those pictures to the Kremlin on this first anniversary, but also this, $500,000 in more ammunition and armaments, howitzers and javelins and so on.
Absolutely. So there are a couple of levels of the significance of this visit. First, the emotional and symbolic is that President Putin is giving his speech tomorrow. So he will basically have to react now to President Biden's visit and not vice versa. Second, today is exactly 9 years since Russians invaded Crimea and started the war in the east. And third, today we also honor people who died on Maidan, where we made a choice to join European Union and go the direction away from Russia. Yeah. So, and second level, of course, is practical. We need more weapons. We need more supplies to be able not to be dragged into this long-term war that Putin wants us to. And this is why we need the victory to be fast, the victory to be soon. And this is why President Biden's promises were very significant.
And Kira, give us the picture of what the reports are from the various fronts about this feared Russian spring offensive that's been talked about. I mean, we understand that they don't appear to be making any major inroads.
Absolutely. So Russians did not have any battlefield victory since probably October. Right now, they desperately need to show something. And even with the mobilized troops that they had and using people as a battlefield meat, they were not able to show any significant progress rather than killing more and more people of their own. So city of Bakhmut is still fighting. On different directions, they intensified the fights, but were not pushing forward to something that Putin can show to Russian people using propaganda as something significant, as an achievement. Yeah. And this is why we see an opportunity for ourselves for counteroffense, for hitting them back, for pushing them away from our country. And this is what we are going to do.
Kira Ruddick, thank you very much indeed for joining us once more live in Kyiv. I know the difficulties you have in terms of your diesel generator and so on, but it's appreciated. Thanks for your time here on GB News.
Thank you, and glory to Ukraine.
Latest live there from Kyiv, but let's reflect now that the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken also saying that China may be supplying weapons to Russia for that war in Ukraine. Let's speak to the Executive Director of the Henry Jackson Society, Dr. Alan Mendoza, joining us. Thank you very much for your time, Dr. Mendoza, once more. This would be a major change of the sort of balance in terms of what people are saying is a new Cold War.
Yes, absolutely. If the Chinese were to now take a stand and actually join with Russia in this war and aggression on Ukraine, on the free world, of course it would mark a fundamental shift in how we would have to look at China in return. So yes, this is a potential major game changer as far as China's relationship with Russia is concerned, but also its relationship with us in the free world.
Yeah, what would China gain from it? You know, a lot of people thinking they've got enough on their plate with Taiwan in terms of relationships with the United States, apart from opening up a difficulty on two fronts, if it were.
Well, I'd agree with you. Obviously, it wouldn't make necessarily strategic sense for the Chinese. But the two things that matter here probably are business sense. The Chinese, as you know, have been helping the Russians evade sanctions already, and they've taken full advantage of lower prices for Russian oil, for example, to stock up on that. So here's another potential market, this time for weapons. So there is that side of things. And the second side is, does China really want, if you like, the free world to win in the Russia-Ukraine contest. Yes, sure, if they open up a second front, that's not going to look good for them with the Americans. But then again, Russia slinking away, having attacked Ukraine, doesn't bode well for their future chances, potentially, in terms of attacking Taiwan.
And in terms of guns and bullets, could it actually change the whole situation? We learn about the difficulties that NATO's got resupplying the stockpiles and the rate that Ukraine is going through ammunition. Presumably, the Chinese have got pretty substantial stockpiles.
Well, they've got a very large army, and that army has obviously lived off of a very large ammunition dump as well. That could easily be transferred, and you're right. That would make a significant difference, A, to Russia's ability to actually prosecute the war, but B, this whole question of being able to resupply the Ukrainians. Now, it wouldn't be on its own the end of the war in one fell swoop, but it would make the Ukrainians sort of battle a lot harder than if the Chinese didn't get involved.
So given that, the significance of this announcement, first of all, by America, of this $500 million rather, in terms of ammunition and howitzers and Javelin missiles and so on, that's quite a lot of kit.
Yes, I mean, the Americans are doubling down, showing everyone, and I think part of this is in relation also to the Chinese gambit, saying, don't think you can stick your nose into this conflict. If you do, you're going to come face to face with us in this. It's a clear message. Number one, we are redoubling our support for Ukraine. We want Ukraine to be able to defend itself properly and to push back the invasion, but it's also a subtle message, or not so subtle, to the Chinese to say, stay out of this. This is not your fight.
Yeah. Dr. Alan Mendoza from the Henry Jackson Society, thank you very much indeed for bringing us your analysis on that. And coming up, more analysis on what's happening north of the border. The SNP leadership race underway following Nicola Sturgeon's departure. Of course, Kate Forbes is in the frame at the moment. But is there also a Stop Kate coalition too? All that coming up in a moment. First, the latest headlines with Tamsin.
Mark, thanks very much. It's 2:30. Here are the headlines from the GB newsroom. President Biden has promised more than $500 million worth of aid to Ukraine after making a surprise trip to its capital. It comes just days before the first anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion. Mr. Zelensky said the visit was an extremely important sign of support for all Ukrainians. The US president said his country would stand with Ukraine for as long as it takes.
Putin thought Ukraine was weak and the West was divided. As you know, Mr. President, I said to you in the beginning, he's counting on us not sticking together. He was counting on the inability to keep NATO united. He was counting on us not to be able to bring in others on the side of Ukraine. He thought he could outlast us. I don't think he's thinking that right now. God knows what he's thinking, but I don't think he's thinking that.
The partner of missing mother of two, Nicola Bulley, has spoken of the family's agony after a body was found yesterday in the river near to where she went missing. Lancashire police are working to provide a formal identification of the body, which was found in the water around a mile from where Nicola was last seen. They're currently treating the death as unexplained. The 45-year-old disappeared more than 3 weeks ago whilst walking her dog. More than 11,000 healthcare workers from the GMB and Unite unions in England and Wales are walking out today in their continuing dispute over pay and staffing. The workers striking include ambulance workers, paramedics and call handlers. GMB says it's over a month since the government engaged in meaningful dialogue. Elsewhere, the result of a ballot of around 45,000 junior doctors is expected to be announced later today by the British Medical Association. TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle.
Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, welcome back to GB News Live. Now, Rishi Sunak's seen his plans for a deal on the Northern Ireland Protocol perhaps suffering a setback following a backlash from senior Tories and unionists. Pressure growing on the Prime Minister, as government sources said tense talks in Downing Street over the weekend on overhauling the protocol were yet to yield a breakthrough. Just to update you on that, Downing Street now refusing to say whether MPs will get a vote on any new deal. Well, the Democratic Unionist Party leader Sir Geoffrey Donaldson saying that the big moment had arrived and that the next decision by London and Brussels would have profound consequences. Let's get more from Stormont and our Northern Ireland reporter Dougie Beattie, who's there for us. And Dougie, we had this news that James Cleverly, Foreign Secretary, Northern Ireland Secretary Chris Heaton-Harris would be having this video conference call with Markus Sefcovic, the European Commissioner. Has that brought any reaction from Stormont? Do they think things are on the move at the moment?
Well, the good news is that the DUP have said that things are still moving. They haven't said we've walked away from any talks. They're still there. And you've got to remember, of course, that Maros Sefcovic hasn't got the power to do away with the European Courts of Justice. That's not in his remit to do it. It's not in his power to do so. And that's really what's troubling unionists here in Northern Ireland, because they want to stand over their own laws and make their own laws and be responsible for their own laws. But of course, that may give an advantage to Northern Ireland over the Republic of Ireland. So these talks are at that very, very crucial part now. But it's okay saying they want a deal and everybody wants a deal. But if the DUP, which represents the majority of unionists in Northern Ireland, aren't on board, well then there is no deal, because every nationalist party here quite likes the protocol. It aligns the Republic of Ireland's economy with Northern Ireland's economy, or the other way around actually, and keeps them inside the EU. And of course all nationalist parties here have representation of MEPs, should it be through their own parties or sister parties, in the Republic of Ireland. And that is the problem with this deal, and they've got to fix that. And because the DUP has been sold a pup that many times, and now they're talking about removing the legislation that's going through the House of Lords, that the UK government could unilaterally change parts of the protocol, that will only set the dogs running even more. Nerves will jangle even more amongst unionism if that is given up first. So I think whatever is going on here, unionism will have to see the colour of their money first and make sure the legislation's in place before that happens. And of course, Keir Starmer is offering Rishi Sunak political cover for this. I don't think that's going to go down too well either with the Tory parties and where he stands. So there's so many moving parts at this minute in time that it is nearly impossible to call, and it would be hard to think there'll be a deal this week.
Indeed, I mean, as you were saying, Sir Keir Starmer indicating the Prime Minister would not have to rely on those backbenchers, then putting, as he said, country first, party second. But the other aspect to this was this Times report at the weekend suggesting that the Prime Minister could be willing to go ahead with what was called the UK-EU Accord, even if it was without DUP support. I mean, a lot of questions. So Bernard Jenkins, of course, as a senior Tory backbencher, how would that actually work?
Well, it would leave you exactly where you are now. It would leave you with this place behind me with no government because, as I've said, the nationalist parties are very much in favour of the protocol. It's unionism that they have to do the deal with. No matter how they get round it, they can have all the deals they want. They've got to bring the unionists to the table and then start to negotiate from there. I mean, that was very much obvious on Friday. Thursday night, Rishi Sunak arrived in to Belfast. It was believed that there was very high-level meetings with the unionist parties on the Thursday night and about an hour on the Friday, when the rest of the parties that were in there got 20 minutes, half an hour, and then they came out and said, or the nationalist parties thought it was game on. It's never going to be game on, even if Rishi Sunak decides to do a deal with the EU. We've already been there. That's where we are now, and there's no way forward unless unionism comes with it.
Circles within circles. Doogie, as ever at Stormont, thanks for updating us. We'll see what emerges from this afternoon, of course. But let's turn from Northern Ireland now to Scotland and the future of the Scottish National Party, with Scotland's Health Secretary Humza Yousaf announcing that he's running for the post, as well as the former Community Safety Minister Ash Regan, who resigned from her ministerial position in protest at the gender reform plans, and Scotland's Finance Secretary Kate Forbes announcing she too will be putting her hat in the ring. But the party's former leader in Westminster, Angus Robertson, where he has ruled himself out of that race. Let's get the reaction now of our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, to what's been announced so far, and in particular, away from the personalities to the policy, Darren. It's interesting that Humza Yousaf has, in this past hour, expressed concern over this idea of using the general election as a de facto referendum on independence, saying that basically that was perhaps... I'm not wedded to the idea of using that. What I would say, let's stop talking about process and start talking about policy.
Yeah, so I think this is really, really interesting in that Nicola Sturgeon, who was within at least the SNP a very, very dominant figure, if not Scottish politics as a whole, managed to paper over some of those cracks within the SNP about where precisely to turn next when it comes to the independence movement, to the second referendum. The reason I say that is because, of course, there was meant to be this big meeting next month of the SNP to work out whether it was a good strategy to use the Westminster elections next year as a de facto referendum. Now, many in the party didn't like that. Many felt it was the only way forward, given the fact that the Supreme Court had shut down one avenue, and clearly the UK Parliament behind me is not going to open up another. But it is a sign of some of the tensions within the SNP. We know, too, there are concerns about the Gender Recognition Act. You talked there about Ash Regan. She is not terribly in favour of it. But also Kate Forbes, who is the Finance Secretary, is seen as someone who's socially conservative. He would also not be in favour of this, though a majority of MSPs in the Scottish Parliament did vote forward. She, interestingly, was on maternity leave at the time, so did not have to take part in that vote. She's a notable character, though. She's only 32 years old, holds one of the most senior posts within government, but is seen as kind of part of this massive potential generational shift we're going to see now within the Scottish National Party, Mark, because two of the old guard have decided not to stand, not least of all John Swinney, who's the deputy leader, but also Angus Robinson, who of course used to lead the SNP here at Westminster. He's the Constitution Secretary. He tweeted saying that as a father of two very young children, the time is not right for me and my family to take on such a huge commitment. So what you're seeing is, yes, divisions about policy, and we're going to see that, I think, exposed even more as this race continues over the next month or so. It's not going to be until the end of March until we get a new name, until we get a new leader. But additionally, we're going to see this big generational shift, it seems, as well, with the kind of young guard who've been used to the SNP in government taking over, with some of the old guard, if you like, stepping back.
Yeah, and just to look at that dynamic, suggestions from Edinburgh that it may actually be sort of dividing into the young camp and Kate Forbes and a Stop Kate coalition in terms of the rump of what was the old Sturgeon party, if you like.
Yeah, Nicola Sturgeon, though, has said today that she is not prepared to name who she wants to see as a successor in this process. But yes, there are divisions. I mean, Nicola Sturgeon is undoubtedly seen as someone who is socially progressive, who is liberal in terms of her views around a whole range of social issues, who has taken the Scottish National Party, it must be said, on an effort to expand the role of the state in Scotland. Now, there's also a feeling Kate Forbes potentially might be slightly more right-wing in her politics. And clearly, when you've got this big discussion in Scottish politics about the independence question, some of these other big policy issues do take a back seat. But frankly, if there's going to be not just a change of leader, but a generational shift as well, and a shift in regards to policy areas, these divisions are going to be exposed up until March 27 when there is a new leader. And there are clearly different factions within that party, something Nicola Sturgeon, as I say, through the sheer force of her popularity, has managed to paper crack over. And I don't think we're going to find ourselves there over the next couple of weeks where those paper cracks, or that plaster, if you like, will hold. We have got, though, until the end of the week, so we might see some other names come forward, but I think we're starting to see, essentially, those battle lines now being drawn. What is interesting, though, beyond that, is the fact that it might have elsewhere here in the UK, in note that actually none of these names that have stepped forward thus far are names that most people in the rest of the UK would recognise, and that will have that will have an impact as well, because again, Nicola Sturgeon was a big personality and a big, massive politician, not just in Scotland but across the rest of the UK as well.
Yeah, and just to touch on one other perhaps unifying issue, and that is that so far, we'll obviously reflect on all voices here across Westminster, is that the gender recognition reform issue really is not being pursued by any of these candidates. They see it pretty much now as a footnote in Scottish political history.
Yeah, just to take you back a little bit, for those that don't know, of course, this was a bill that was passed in the Scottish Parliament. Then the UK government looked at it. Now, as always in the UK system, we have to remember this place behind me is supreme in our constitution, whether one likes it or not. They are devolved parliaments for a reason, both in Cardiff and Edinburgh and in Belfast as well. And so the UK government felt that it couldn't go ahead with that. It essentially struck down that bill, or would not allow it to enter into law. And there was a sense that Nicola Sturgeon and the SNP wanted to use this almost as a test case, if you like, to try and argue that Westminster was yet again overruling the will of the Scottish people, in the sense that this gender recognition bill was passed by a majority in the Scottish Parliament, though polls would suggest the majority of Scottish people were not in favour of it. But given the fact that we had a whole row over it, and given the fact that actually it didn't get through the public test of public opinion, if you like, it does seem that the SNP decided it's all rather toxic. It's one of the reasons maybe Nicola Sturgeon stepped down. Let's step away from that issue entirely.
Darren, as ever, at Westminster, thank you very much indeed for taking us through that. And, of course, we'll update people with more as we get it from both Westminster and Edinburgh. But let's now tell you about an alleged victim giving evidence in an organ harvesting trial. This is Ek and Beatrice Ekweremadu and their daughter Sonia and Obina Obeto, all charged in relation to an alleged plot to bring a young man from Nigeria for his kidney to then be harvested here. Well, the young man who was allegedly trafficked, due to give evidence both today and tomorrow. And our national reporter Paul Hawkins has been following the case at the Old Bailey. Extraordinary circumstances, Paul. What's the court heard?
Yeah, so the court's been hearing from the alleged victim this morning via video link, and they using an interpreter. He did speak English, but there were some questions as he was cross-examined by the prosecution that he couldn't answer, so they had an interpreter with him. But what we did establish was that he came from a poor family, a family that he said had no money, that he left school at 15 from a village in Nigeria, went to work in Lagos for his uncle in a phone accessory shop. He was there for 6 years when he says he was contacted via WhatsApp by Dr. Obina Bafta, who offered him to come to work in London, offered him to help him with finding employment, also said that he could stay at his house while he was finding employment, helped to secure him a passport. He also had to undergo a blood test for what he thought was a visa, and he admitted that he was someone who'd never been out of Nigeria, he'd never had a passport, he'd never had a visa, he hadn't even been to Abuja, where he went to take these blood tests, which he assumed were for the purposes of this visa. So we've established some of the background to the alleged victim. As you say, Ike Ekweremadu, his wife Beatrice, their daughter Sonia, and Dr. Abina Obeta deny all the charges. They are charged with facilitating the travel of that alleged victim to the UK, pretending that he was the cousin of their daughter Sonia, who's a kidney patient at the Royal Free Hospital, and then trying to coerce him into donating his kidney for up to £7,000. We should add, by the way, that the operation didn't go ahead in the end because the consultant deemed the alleged victim not to be a suitable donor, and it was only when the alleged victim handed himself into police last year that the family and the doctor were arrested, and the charges were brought, charges which we should add they deny, and the case continues.
With more evidence tomorrow, indeed. Paul, for the moment at the Old Bailey, thanks for updating us with that case. And of course, we'll continue to report on that as it continues tomorrow. But let's now talk about the most dangerous domestic abusers to be added to the sex offenders register under new government plans. The proposals go further than ever before in protecting women and girls from harassment, aggression and violence. They focus on stopping domestic abuse before it actually takes place. The Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, saying violence against women would be treated as a national threat too, on the same level as terrorism. Let's speak now to Valerie Wise, who's National Domestic Abuse Lead at the Victim Support Group. Valerie, thank you for your time. First of all, just to touch on this issue about what they call coercion and controlling behaviour, that's now being addressed as part of the whole abuse, if you like, and that could even put you on the violent and sex offenders register if you are found guilty of such a thing.
Yeah, well, I think this is a real positive step forward. And I think a lot of people, victims, alleged perpetrators, police and other support agencies still don't fully understand what coercive and controlling behaviour is. So I think, first of all, there needs to be an education of everybody involved, agencies and support agencies particular, and the police, to make sure that it's recognised, because in extreme circumstances, it can end up with somebody being murdered. Yeah. And so I think it is a very, very important issue. And it's been the law for a long time, but I still don't think it's properly fully understood.
Right, and when we get these court cases, this seems to be the pattern, that this is how it begins, and then, as you say, it progresses to direct violence against a person. But just on the other aspect, where we've got now this category as a national threat, could that be a difficulty, however, in terms of the police getting involved then, trying to find the manpower to address that with the same weight, if you like, as they do terrorism, for instance?
Well, actually, I think it's really important, because the fact is 2.4 million adults last year were the victims of domestic abuse. So this is a massive problem. And I think it is correct that it is being put on the same footing as tackling terrorism, because this is a huge stain on our society and impacts really badly on women, on whole families, and on children in families where domestic abuse is taking place. So I think this is a good step forward. Yeah,
however, my point was, do the police forces actually have the manpower, given what they've said about recruitment and retention, to actually treat this as they do with organised crime and terrorism? I.e., have they got sufficient officers' seniority and experience to deal with it?
Well, I think that if they haven't, then we need to address that. I also think, and obviously the police are beginning to, we need to address the fact that at the moment, a lot of women and young women and girls don't have confidence in the police because of high-profile cases. But I think we can't just say there might not be enough manpower, so we're not going to deal with it. This is a very, very serious crime and needs to be given top priority and top attention.
As indeed the Home Secretary's outlined. Valerie Wise from Victim Support, thank you very much indeed for joining us here on GB News. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Now, let's tell you about February being Raynaud's Awareness Month, bringing attention to a condition affecting as many as 1 in 6. It's a lack of blood flow to the body, especially prevalent in those dealing with the colder months, February included, of course. Our London reporter Lisa Hartle went to find out more for us.
These photos show the effects of Raynaud's. Fingers that have turned yellow or white as blood flow is restricted during an attack. Not many people have heard of the condition, yet it affects over 10 million people in the UK. It affects blood flow to parts of the body, most commonly hands and feet. These painful attacks are brought on by stress or cold temperatures. Jodie's had Raynaud since she was a teenager. She was at a football match when her fingers changed colour. After doing some research, she went to her GP.
They didn't really know anything about it, and she suggested that I put hot potatoes in my pockets, which wasn't really very helpful. It happens quite a lot in supermarkets. You know, if you go down the cold fridge or freezer aisles, that's when it is quite bad. And it's good now that there are different types of bags. When it was the thin plastic bags, it was just useless because your fingers go completely white. It can be one, it can be the end of one, or it can be all. But they go completely numb, so you can't feel anything, and it's just really difficult to kind of pick things up or do anything really when you're having an attack. It can take a couple of minutes for the feeling to come back, or it can take, an hour for the feeling to come back.
Though rare, the condition can be a sign of a more serious illness called scleroderma.
It is a rare autoimmune condition. It affects 19,000 people, so we don't want to raise alarm bells, but if you're having Raynaud's symptoms, but also having sore or swollen fingers or experiencing acid reflux, it could be an indication of this condition, so we would recommend going to your GP and talking to them.
People with severe Raynaud's can take medication. For those with a milder form, it's about keeping warm.
I was really worried about the energy prices increasing, because if I don't stay warm, then I get more of these attacks, and it can cause so many problems. Even just kind of, if you're working from home, even just typing, you can't feel your fingers. You can't really work like that.
We surveyed our community to ask them about the rising energy costs and how that's affecting their health. And it was quite shocking that we had results of over 76% of people were avoiding putting their heating on, which would then cause them a painful Raynaud's attack rather than pay the energy cost bills. So we are asking, we have written an open letter to the Chancellor to ask for some help for people with Raynaud's, particularly severe Raynaud's.
The charity hopes raising awareness will encourage people with the symptoms to seek a diagnosis from their GP. Lisa Hartle, GB News, London.
Splendid dog. Now, that's it for the moment from GB News Live. Back again tomorrow, of course, at the same time. But we'll keep you updated, of course, with the Nicola Bulley inquiry throughout the day. Patrick up with you next. Let's get an update on the weather now.
Hello, Alex Deacon here with your latest weather update from the Met Office. Been mild today. It'll be mild tonight and tomorrow. Another fairly cloudy day tomorrow, but not much rain around. And certainly across the northeast, the winds will be a lot lighter than they have been today. We're between high and low pressure. This low squeeze in the isobars, very gusty across the Northern Isles today. Those winds steadily easing overnight. This weather front providing a band of cloud and some rain, pushing away from the central belt of Scotland, but staying fairly damp tonight across the Highlands and the Western Isles. Bit of drizzle elsewhere over the hills of northern England, southern Scotland, but most will have a dry night, certainly across the south. Might be a bit of mist and fog here and there. Certainly won't be any frost, with temperatures staying up at 7, 8, 9 degrees Celsius. So a very mild start to Tuesday. There will be some rain, chiefly over the Highlands and the Western Isles initially, pushing back over the Northern Isles. Getting quite windy again across the far northwest, but generally the wind's lighter than today. Could see some sunny spells, northeast England and northeast Scotland. Most places, though, just rather grey, but it won't be cold. 10, 11, 12, maybe 13 or 14 with a bit of sunshine in northeast Scotland. The winds will pick up again, though, in the northwest, with rain returning to the Western Isles through the evening. This is a band of rain moving into Northern Ireland, right across western Scotland and eventually into parts of England and Wales. So it will be changing the weather as we go through Wednesday. Much more cloud around, certainly some outbreaks of rain initially over the Midlands, northern England and Wales, working into eastern parts of England as the day goes on. Behind that, it turns brighter, but also colder. And we will see some showers coming in across northern Scotland that have some snow mixed in, certainly over the hills. So it will be turning colder, but 7 to 10 Celsius on Wednesday. Feeling colder than Tuesday, yes, but these temperatures about average for the time of year.